the snowdrop. It was winter time. The air was cold, the wind was sharp, but within the closed doors it was warm and comfortable, and within the closed door lay the flower. It lay in the bulb under the snow-covered earth. One day rain fell. The drops penetrated through the snowy covering down into the earth and touched the flower bulb, and talked of the bright world above. Soon the sunbeam pierced its way through the snow to the root, and within the root there was a stirring. "Come in," said the flower. "I cannot," said the sunbeam. "I am not strong enough to unlock the door. When the summer comes, I shall be strong." "When will it be summer?" asked the flower. And she repeated this question each time a new sunbeam made its way down to her. But the summer was yet far distant. The snow still lay upon the ground, and there was a coat of ice on the water every night. "What a long time it takes! What a long time it takes!" said the flower. "I feel a stirring and striving within me. I must stretch myself. I must unlock the door. I must get out and must nod a good morning to the summer. And what a happy time that will be!" And the flower stirred and stretched itself within the thin rind which the water had softened from without, and the snow and the earth had warned, and the sunbeam had knocked at, and it shot forth under the snow with a greenish-white blossom on a green stalk, with narrow, thick leaves which seemed to want to protect it. The snow was cold, but was pierced by the sunbeam. Therefore it was easy to get through it. And now the sunbeam came with greater strength than before. "Welcome, welcome," sang and sounded every ray, and the flower lifted itself up over the snow into the brighter world. The sunbeams caressed and kissed it so that it opened altogether, white as snow and ornamented with green stripes. It bent its head in joy and humility. "Beautiful flower," said the sunbeams, "how graceful and delicate you are. You are the first, you are the only one, you are our love, you are the bell that rings out for summer, beautiful summer. Over country and town, all the snow will melt, the cold winds will be driven away, we shall rule, all will become green, and then you will have companions, syringas, laburnums, and roses. But you are the first, so graceful, so delicate. That was a great pleasure. It seemed as if the air was singing and sounding, as if rays of light were piercing through the leaves and the stalks of the flower. There it stood, so delicate and so easily broken, and yet so strong in its young beauty. It stood there in its white dress with the green stripes and made a summer. But there was a long time yet to the summer-time. Clouds hid the sun, and bleak winds were blowing. "You have come too early," said wind and weather. "We have still the power, and you shall feel it, and give it up to us. You should have stayed quietly at home, and not have run out to make a display of yourself. Your time is not come yet." It was a cutting cold. The days which now come brought not a single sunbeam. It was weather that might break such a little flower in two with cold. But the flower had more strength than she herself knew of. She was strong in joy and in faith in the summer, which would be sure to come, which had been announced by her deep longing and confirmed by the warm sunlight. And so she remained standing in confidence in the snow, in her white garment, bending her head even while the snowflakes fell thick and heavy and the icy winds swept over her. "You break," they said, "and fade and fade. What did you want out here? Why did you let yourself be tempted? The sunbeam only made game of you. Now you have what you deserve, you summer gawk." "Summer gawk," she repeated in the cold morning hour. "Oh, summer gawk," cried some children rejoicingly. "Yonder stands one. How beautiful, how beautiful! The first one, the only one." These words did the flower so much good. They seemed to her like warm sunbeams. In her joy, the flower did not even feel when it was broken off. It lay in a child's hand, and was kissed by a child's mouth, and carried into a warm room, and looked on by gentle eyes, and put into water. How strengthening, how invigorating! The flower thought she had suddenly come upon the summer. The daughter of the house, a beautiful little girl, was confirmed, and she had a friend who was confirmed too. He was studying for an examination, for an appointment. "He shall be my summer gawk," she said, and she took the delicate flower and laid it in a piece of scented paper, on which verses were written, beginning with summer gawk and ending with summer gawk. "My friend, be a winter gawk." She had twitted him with the summer. Yes, all this was in the verses, and the paper was folded up like a letter, and the flower was folded in the letter too. It was dark around her, dark as in those days when she lay hidden in the bulb. The flower went forth on her journey, and lay in the post-bag, and was pressed and crushed, which was not at all pleasant, but that soon came to an end. The journey was over, the letter was opened, and read by the dear friend. How pleased he was! He kissed the letter, and it was laid, with its enclosure of verses, in a box, in which there were many beautiful verses, but all of them without flowers. She was the first, the only one, as the sunbeams had called her, and it was a pleasant thing to think of that. She had time enough, moreover, to think about it. She thought of it while the summer passed away, and the long winter went by, and the summer came again, before she appeared once more. But now the young man was not pleased at all. He took hold of the letter very roughly and threw the verses away, so that the flower fell on the ground. Flat and faded she certainly was, but why should she be thrown on the ground? Still, it was better to be here than in the fire, where the verses and the paper were being burnt to ashes. What had happened? What happens so often? The flower had made a gawk of him. That was a jest. The girl had made a fool of him. That was no jest. She had, during the summer, chosen another friend. Next morning the sun shone in upon the little flattened snowdrop. That looked as if it had been painted upon the floor. The servant girl who was sweeping out the room picked it up, and laid it in one of the books which were upon the table, in the belief that it must have fallen out while the room was being arranged. Again the flower lay among verses, printed verses, and they are better than written ones. At least, more money has been spent upon them. And after this years went by, the book stood upon the bookshelf, and then it was taken up, and somebody read out of it. It was a good book, verses and songs by the old Danish poet, Ambrosius Stubb, which are well worth reading. The man who was now reading the book turned over a page. "Why, there's a flower," he said, "a snowdrop, a summer gawk, a poet gawk. That flower must have been put in there with a meaning. Poor Ambrosius Stubb. He was a summer fool too, a poet fool. He came too early, before his time, and therefore he had to taste the sharp winds, and wander about as a guest from one noble landed proprietor to another, like a flower in a glass of water, a flower in rhymed verses, summer fool, winter fool, fun and folly. But the first, the only, the fresh young Danish poet of those days, yes, thou shalt remain as a token in the book, thou little snowdrop. Thou hast been put there with a meaning." And so the snowdrop was put back into the book, and felt equally honoured and pleased to know that it was a token in the glorious book of songs, and that he who was the first to sing and to write had been also a snowdrop, had been a summer gawk, and had been looked upon in the winter time as a fool. The flower understood this in her way, as we interpret everything in our way. That is the story of the snowdrop. The storks. On the last house in a little village, the storks had built a nest, and the mother stork sat in it with her 4 young ones. who stretched out their necks and pointed their black beaks, which had not yet turned red like those of the parent birds. A little way off, on the edge of the roof, stood the father stork, quite upright and stiff. Not liking to be quite idle, he drew up one leg and stood on the other, so still that it seemed almost as if he were carved in wood. "It must look very grand," thought he, "for my wife to have a sentry guarding her nest. They do not know that I am her husband. They will think I have been commanded to stand here, which is quite aristocratic." And so he continued standing on one leg. In the street below were a number of children at play, and when they caught sight of the storks, one of the boldest amongst the boys began to sing a song about them, and very soon he was joined by the rest. These are the words of the song, but each only sang what he could remember of them in his own way. "Stork, stork, fly away. Stand not on one leg, I pray. See, your wife is in her nest, with her little ones at rest. They will hang one and fry another. They will shoot a third and roast his brother." "Just hear what those boys are singing," said the young storks. "They say we shall be hanged and roasted." "Never mind what they say. You need not listen," said the mother. "They can do no harm." But the boys went on singing and pointing at the storks and mocking at them, excepting one of the boys whose name was Peter. He said it was a shame to make fun of animals and would not join with them at all. The mother stork comforted her young ones and told them not to mind. "See," she said, "how quiet your father stands, although he is only on one leg." "But we are very much frightened," said the young storks, and they drew back their heads into the nests. The next day, when the children were playing together and saw the storks, they sang the song again. "They will hang one and roast another." "Shall we be hanged and roasted?" asked the young storks. "No, certainly not," said the mother. "I will teach you to fly, and when you have learnt, we will fly into the meadows and pay a visit to the frogs, who will bow themselves to us in the water and cry, 'Croak, croak,' and then we shall eat them up. That will be fun." "And what next?" asked the young storks. "Then," replied the mother, "all the storks in the country will assemble together and go through their autumn maneuvers, so that it is very important for everyone to know how to fly properly. If they do not, the general will thrust them through with his beak and kill them. Therefore you must take pains and learn, so as to be ready when the drilling begins. Then we may be killed after all, as the boys say, and hark, they are singing again." "Listen to me, and not to them," said the mother stork. "After the great review is over, we shall fly away to warm countries far from hence, where there are mountains and forests. To Egypt, where we shall see 3 cornered houses built of stone with pointed tops that reach nearly to the clouds. They are called pyramids, and are older than a stork could imagine. And in that country there is a river that overflows its banks and then goes back, leaving nothing but mire. There we can walk about and eat frogs in abundance." "Oh, oh," cried the young storks. "Yes, it is a delightful place. There is nothing to do all day long but eat. And while we are so well off out there, in this country there will not be a single green leaf on the trees, and the weather will be so cold that the clouds will freeze and fall on the earth in little white rags." The stork meant snow, but she could not explain it in any other way. "Will the naughty boys freeze and fall in pieces?" asked the young storks. "No, they will not freeze and fall into pieces," said the mother, "but they will be very cold and be obliged to sit all day in a dark, gloomy room, while we shall be flying about in foreign lands, where there are blooming flowers and warm sunshine." Time passed on, and the young storks grew so large that they could stand upright in the nest and look about them. The father brought them every day beautiful frogs, little snakes, and all kinds of stork dainties that he could find. And then, how funny it was to see the tricks he would perform to amuse them. He would lay his head quite round over his tail and clatter with his beak as if it had been a rattle. And then he would tell them stories all about the marshes and fens. "Come," said the mother one day, "now you must learn to fly." And all the 4 young ones were obliged to come out on the top of the roof. Oh, how they tottered at first, and were obliged to balance themselves with their wings, or they would have fallen to the ground below. "Look at me," said the mother. "You must hold your heads in this way, and place your feet so. Once, twice, once, twice. That is it. Now you will be able to take care of yourselves in the world." Then she flew a little distance from them, and the young ones made a spring to follow her, but down they fell plump, for their bodies were still too heavy. "I don't want to fly," said one of the young storks, creeping back into the nest. "I don't care about going to warm countries. Would you like to stay here and freeze when the winter comes?" said the mother, "or till the boys comes to hang you or to roast you? Well then, I'll call them." "Oh, no, no," said the young stork, jumping out on the roof with the others, and now they were all attentive, and by the 3rd day could fly a little. Then they began to fancy they could soar, so they tried to do so, resting on their wings, but they soon found themselves falling and had to flap their wings as quickly as possible. The boys came again in the street singing their song, "Stork, stork, fly away." "Shall we fly down and pick their eyes out?" asked the young storks. "No, leave them alone," said the mother. "Listen to me, that is much more important. Now then, 1, 2, 3. Now to the right. 1, 2, 3. Now to the left, round the chimney. There now, that was very good. That last flap of the wings was so easy and graceful that I shall give you permission to fly with me tomorrow to the marshes. There will be a number of very superior storks there with their families, and I expect you to show them that my children are the best brought up of any who may be present. You must strut about proudly. It will look well and make you respected." "But may we not punish those naughty boys?" asked the young storks. "No, let them scream away as much as they like. You can fly from them now, up high amid the clouds, and will be in the land of the pyramids when they are freezing, and have not a green leaf on the trees or an apple to eat." "We will revenge ourselves," whispered the young storks to each other as they again joined the exercising. Of all the boys in the street who sang the mocking song about the storks, not one was so determined to go on with it as he who first began it. Yet he was a little fellow, not more than 6 years old. To the young storks he appeared at least 100, for he was so much bigger than their father and mother. To be sure, storks cannot be expected to know how old children and grown-up people are, so they determined to have their revenge on this boy, because he began the song first and would keep on with it. The young storks were very angry and grew worse as they grew older. So at last their mother was obliged to promise that they should be revenged, but not until the day of their departure. "We must see first how you acquit yourselves at the grand review," said she. "If you get on badly there, the general will thrust his beak through you, and you will be killed," as the boys said, though not exactly in the same manner. "So we must wait and see." "You shall see," said the young birds, and then they took such pains and practised so well every day that at last it was quite a pleasure to see them fly so lightly and prettily. As soon as the autumn arrived, all the storks began to assemble together before taking their departure for warm countries during the winter. Then the review commenced. They flew over forests and villages to show what they could do, for they had a long journey before them. The young storks performed their part so well that they received a mark of honor with frogs and snakes as a present. These presents were the best part of the affair, for they could eat the frogs and snakes, which they very quickly did. "Now let us have our revenge," they cried. "Yes, certainly," cried the mother stork. "I have thought upon the best way to be revenged. I know the pond in which all the little children lie, waiting till the storks come to take them to their parents. The prettiest little babies lie there dreaming more sweetly than they will ever dream in the time to come. All parents are glad to have a little child, and children are so pleased with a little brother or sister. Now we will fly to the pond and fetch a little baby for each of the children who did not sing that naughty song to make game of the storks. But the naughty boy who began the song first, what shall we do to him?" cried the young storks. "There lies in the pond a little dead baby who has dreamed itself to death," said the mother. "We will take it to the naughty boy, and he will cry because we have brought him a little dead brother. But you have not forgotten the good boy who said it was a shame to laugh at animals. We will take him a little brother and sister too, because he was good. He is called Peter, and you shall all be called Peter in future." So they all did what their mother had arranged, and from that day, even till now, all the storks have been called Peter. The storm shakes the shield. In the old days, when Grandpapa was quite a little boy and ran about in little red breeches and a red coat, and a feather in his cap. For that's the costume the little boys wore in his time when they were dressed in their best. Many things were very different from what they are now. There was often a good deal of show in the streets, show that we don't see nowadays because it has been abolished as too old-fashioned. Still, it is very interesting to hear Grandfather tell about it. It must really have been a gorgeous sight to behold in those days when the shoemaker brought over the shield, when the courthouse was changed. The silken flag waved to and fro. On the shield itself, a double eagle was displayed, and a big boot. The youngest lads carried the welcome, and the chest of the workmen's guild, and their shirt sleeves were adorned with red and white ribbons. The elder ones carried drawn swords, each with a lemon stuck on its point. There was a full band of music, and the most splendid of all the instruments was the bird, as Grandfather called the big stick with the crescent on the top, and all manner of dingle-dangles hanging to it, a perfect Turkish clatter of music. The stick was lifted high in the air and swung up and down till it jingled again, and quite dazzled one's eyes when the sun shone on all its glory of gold and silver and brass. In front of the procession ran the harlequin, dressed in clothes made of all kinds of coloured patches, artfully sewn together, with a black face and bells on his head like a sledge-horse. He beat the people with his bat, which made a great clattering without hurting them, and the people would crowd together and fall back, only to advance again the next moment. Little boys and girls fell over their own toes into the gutter. Old women dispensed digs with their elbows and looked sour and took snuff. One laughed, another chatted. The people thronged the windows and doorsteps, and even all the roofs. The sun shone, and although they had a little rain too, that was good for the farmer, and when they got wetted thoroughly, they only thought what a blessing it was for the country, and what stories Grandpapa could tell. As a little boy, he had seen all these fine doings in their greatest pomp. The oldest of the policemen used to make a speech from the platform on which the shield was hung up, and the speech was in verse, as if it had been made by a poet, as indeed it had, for 3 people had concocted it together, and they had first drunk a good bowl of punch, so that the speech might turn out well. And the people gave a cheer for the speech, but they shouted much louder for the harlequin, when he appeared in front of the platform and made a grimace at them. The fools played the fool most admirably, and drank mead out of spirit glasses, which they then flung among the crowd, by whom they were caught up. Grandfather was the possessor of one of these glasses, which had been given him by a working mason, who had managed to catch it. Such a scene was really very pleasant, and the shield on the new courthouse was hung with flowers and green wreaths. "One never forgets a feast like that, however old one may grow," said Grandfather. Nor did he forget it, though he saw many other grand spectacles in his time, and could tell about them too. But it was most pleasant of all to hear him tell about the shield that was brought in the town from the old to the new courthouse. Once, when he was a little boy, Grandpapa had gone with his parents to see this festivity. He had never yet been in the metropolis of the country. There were so many people in the streets that he thought that the shield was being carried. There were many shields to be seen. 100 rooms might have been filled with pictures if they had been hung up inside and outside. At the tailor's were pictures of all kinds of clothing, to show that he could stitch up people from the coarsest to the finest. At the tobacco manufacturers were pictures of the most charming little boys, smoking cigars. Just as they do in reality, there were signs with painted butter and herring, clerical collars and coffins, and inscriptions and announcements into the bargain. A person could walk up and down for a whole day through the streets and tire himself out with looking at the pictures. And then he would know all about what people lived in the houses, for they had hung out their shields or signs, and, as Grandfather said, it was a very instructive thing, in a great town, to know at once who the inhabitants were. And this is what happened with these shields when Grandpapa came to the town. He told it me himself, and he hadn't a rogue on his back, as Mother used to tell me he had when he wanted to make me believe something outrageous, for now he looked quite trustworthy. The first night after he came to the town had been signalized by the most terrible gale ever recorded in the newspapers. A gale such as none of the inhabitants had ever before experienced. The air was dark with flying tiles, old woodwork crashed and fell, and a wheelbarrow ran up the streets all alone, only to get out of the way. There was a groaning in the air, and a howling and a shrieking, and altogether it was a terrible storm. The water in the canal rose over the banks, for it did not know where to run. The storm swept over the town, carrying plenty of chimneys with it, and more than one proud weathercock on a church tower had to bow, and has never got over it from that time. There was a kind of sentry house, where dwelt the venerable old superintendent of the fire brigade, who always arrived with the last engine. The storm would not leave this little sentry house alone, but must needs tear it from its fastenings and roll it down the street, and, wonderfully enough, it stopped opposite to the door of the dirty journeyman plasterer, who had saved 3 lives at the last fire, but the sentry house thought nothing of that. The barber's shield, the great brazen dish, was carried away and hurled straight into the embrasure of the councillor of justice, and the whole neighbourhood said this looked almost like malice, inasmuch as they, and nearly all the friends of the councillor's wife, used to call that lady the razor, for she was so sharp that she knew more about other people's business than they knew about it themselves. A shield with a dried salt fish painted on it flew exactly in front of the door of a house where dwelt a man who wrote a newspaper. That was a very poor joke perpetrated by the gale, which seemed to have forgotten that a man who writes in a paper is not the kind of person to understand any liberty taken with him, for he is a king in his own newspaper, and likewise in his own opinion. The weathercock flew to the opposite house, where he perched, looking the picture of malice, so the neighbours said. The cooper's tub stuck itself up under the head of ladies' costumes. The eating-house keeper's bill of fare, which had hung at his door in a heavy frame, was posted by the storm over the entrance to the theatre, where nobody went. It was a ridiculous list. horseradish, soup, and stuffed cabbage. And now people came in plenty. The fox's skin, the honourable sign of the furrier, was found fastened to the bell-pull of a young man who always went to early lecture and looked like a furled umbrella. He said he was striving after truth and was considered by his aunt a model and an example. The inscription, "Institution for Superior Education," was found near the billiard club, which place of resort was further adorned with the words, "Children brought up by hand." Now, this was not at all witty, but, you see, the storm had done it, and no one has any control over that. It was a terrible night, and in the morning, only think, nearly all the shields had changed places. In some places, the inscriptions were so malicious that grandfather would not speak of them at all, but I saw that he was chuckling secretly, and there may have been some inaccuracy in his description after all. The poor people in the town, and still more the strangers, were continually making mistakes in the people they wanted to see, nor was this to be avoided when they went according to the shields that were hung up. Thus, for instance, some who wanted to go to a very grave assembly of elderly men, where important affairs were to be discussed, found themselves in a noisy boys' school, where all the company were leaping over the chairs and tables. There were also people who made a mistake between the church and the theatre, and that was terrible indeed. Such a storm we have never witnessed in our day, for that only happened in grandpapa's time, when he was quite a little boy. Perhaps we shall never experience a storm of the kind, but our grandchildren may, and we can only hope and pray that all may stay at home while the storm is moving the shields. The story of a mother. A mother sat by her little child. She was very sad, for she feared it would die. It was quite pale, and its little eyes were closed, and sometimes it drew a heavy, deep breath, almost like a sigh. And then the mother gazed more sadly than ever on the poor little creature. Someone knocked at the door, and a poor old man walked in. He was wrapped in something that looked like a great horsecloth, and he required it truly to keep him warm, for it was cold winter. The country everywhere lay covered with snow and ice, and the wind blew so sharply that it cut one's face. The little child had dozed off to sleep for a moment, and the mother, seeing that the old man shivered with the cold, rose and placed a small mug of beer on the stove to warm for him. The old man sat and rocked the cradle, and the mother seated herself on a chair near him, and looked at her sick child, who still breathed heavily, and took hold of its little hand. "You think I shall keep him, do you not?" she said. "Our all-merciful God will surely not take him away from me." The old man, who was indeed Death himself, nodded his head in a peculiar manner, which might have signified either yes or no, and the mother cast down her eyes, while the tears rolled down her cheeks. Then her head became heavy, for she had not closed her eyes for 3 days and nights, and she slept. But only for a moment. Shivering with cold, she started up and looked round the room. The old man was gone, and her child, it was gone too. The old man had taken it with him. In the corner of the room the old clock began to strike. Whirr! Went the chains, the heavy weight sank to the ground, and the clock stopped, and the poor mother rushed out of the house calling for her child. Out in the snow sat a woman in long black garments, and she said to the mother, "Death has been with you in your room. I saw him hastening away with your little child. He strides faster than the wind and never brings back what he has taken away." "Only tell me which way he has gone," said the mother. "Tell me the way, I will find him." "I know the way," said the woman in the black garments. "But before I tell you, you must sing to me all the songs that you have sung to your child. I love these songs. I have heard them before. I am Night, and I saw your tears flow as you sang." "I will sing them all to you," said the mother, "but do not detain me now. I must overtake him and find my child." But Night sat silent and still. Then the mother wept and sang and wrung her hands, and there were many songs and yet even more tears, till at length Night said, "Go to the right into the dark forest of fir trees, for I saw Death take that road with your little child." Within the wood the mother came to crossroads, and she knew not which to take. Just by stood a thorn bush. It had neither leaf nor flower, for it was the cold winter time, and icicles hung on the branches. "Have you not seen Death go by with my little child?" she asked. "Yes," replied the thorn bush. "But I will not tell you which way he has taken until you have warmed me in your bosom. I am freezing to death here, and turning to ice." Then she pressed the bramble to her bosom quite close, so that it might be thawed, and the thorns pierced her flesh, and great drops of blood flowed, but the bramble shot forth fresh green leaves, and they became flowers on the cold winter's night. So warm is the heart of a sorrowing mother. Then the bramble bush told her the path she must take. She came at length to a great lake, on which there was neither ship nor boat to be seen. The lake was not frozen sufficiently for her to pass over on the ice, nor was it open enough for her to wade through, and yet she must cross it, if she wished to find her child. Then she laid herself down to drink up the water of the lake, which was of course impossible for any human being to do, but the bereaved mother thought that perhaps a miracle might take place to help her. "You will never succeed in this," said the lake. "Let us make an agreement together which will be better. I love to collect pearls, and your eyes are the purest I have ever seen. If you will weep those eyes away in tears into my waters, then I will take you to the large hothouse where Death dwells and rears flowers and trees, every one of which is a human life. Oh, what would I not give to reach my child?" said the weeping mother, and as she still continued to weep, her eyes fell into the depths of the lake and became two costly pearls. Then the lake lifted her up and wafted her across to the opposite shore as if she were on a swing, where stood a wonderful building many miles in length. No one could tell whether it was a mountain covered with forests and full of caves, or whether it had been built. But the poor mother could not see, for she had wept her eyes into the lake. "Where shall I find Death, who went away with my little child?" she asked. "He has not arrived here yet," said an old grey-haired woman who was walking about and watering Death's hothouse. "How have you found your way here, and who helped you?" "God has helped me," she replied. "He is merciful. Will you not be merciful too?" "Where shall I find my little child?" "I did not know the child," said the old woman, "and you are blind. Many flowers and trees have faded tonight, and Death will soon come to transplant them. You know already that every human being has a life tree or a life flower, just as may be ordained for him. They look like other plants, but they have hearts that beat. Children's hearts also beat. From that you may perhaps be able to recognize your child. But what will you give me if I tell you what more you will have to do?" "I have nothing to give," said the afflicted mother, "but I would go to the ends of the earth for you." "I can give you nothing to do for me there," said the old woman, "but you can give me your long black hair. You know yourself that it is beautiful, and it pleases me. You can take my white hair in exchange, which will be something in return." "Do you ask nothing more than that?" said she. "I will give it to you with pleasure." And she gave up her beautiful hair, and received in return the white locks of the old woman. Then they went into Death's vast hothouse, where flowers and trees grew together in wonderful profusion. blooming hyacinths under glass bells, and peonies like strong trees. There grew water plants, some quite fresh, and others looking sickly, which had water snakes twining round them, and black crabs clinging to their stems. There stood noble palm trees, oaks, and plantains, and beneath them bloomed thyme and parsley. Each tree and flower had a name. Each represented a human life and belonged to men still living, some in China, others in Greenland, and in all parts of the world. Some large trees had been planted in little pots so that they were cramped for room, and seemed about to burst the pot to pieces, while many weak little flowers were growing in rich soil, with moss all around them, carefully tended and cared for. The sorrowing mother bent over the little plants and heard the human heart beating in each, and recognized the beatings of her child's heart among millions of others. "That is it," she cried, stretching out her hand towards a little crocus flower which hung down its sickly head. "Do not touch the flower," exclaimed the old woman, "but place yourself here, and when death comes, I expect him every minute. Do not let him pull up that plant, but threaten him that if he does, you will serve the other flowers in the same manner. This will make him afraid, for he must account to God for each of them. None can be uprooted unless he receives permission to do so." There rushed through the hothouse a chill of icy coldness, and the blind mother felt that death had arrived. "How did you find your way hither?" asked he. "How could you come here faster than I have?" "I am a mother," she answered. And Death stretched out his hand towards the delicate little flower, but she held her hands tightly round it, and held it fast at the same time with the most anxious care, lest she should touch one of the leaves. Then Death breathed upon her hands, and she felt his breath colder than the icy wind, and her hands sank down powerless. "You cannot prevail against me," said Death. "But a God of mercy can," said she. "I only do his will," replied Death. "I am his gardener. I take all his flowers and trees, and transplant them into the gardens of paradise in an unknown land. How they flourish there, and what that garden resembles, I may not tell you." "Give me back my child," said the mother, weeping and imploring, and she seized two beautiful flowers in her hands, and cried to Death, "I will tear up all your flowers, for I am in despair." "Do not touch them," said Death. "You say you are unhappy, and would you make another mother as unhappy as yourself?" "Another mother!" cried the poor woman, setting the flowers free from her hands. "There are your eyes," said Death. "I fished them up out of the lake for you. They were shining brightly, but I knew not they were yours. Take them back, they are clearer now than before, and then look into the deep well which is close by here. I will tell you the names of the two flowers which you wished to pull up, and you will see the whole future of the human beings they represent, and what you were about to frustrate and destroy." Then she looked into the well, and it was a glorious sight to behold how one of them became a blessing to the world, and how much happiness and joy it spread around. But she saw that the life of the other was full of care and poverty, misery and woe. "Both are the will of God," said Death. "Which is the unhappy flower?" "And which is the blessed one?" she said. "That I may not tell you," said Death, "but thus far you may learn that one of the two flowers represents your own child. It was the fate of your child that you saw, the future of your own child." Then the mother screamed aloud with terror, "Which of them belongs to my child? Tell me that. Deliver the unhappy child. Release it from so much misery. Rather take it away. Take it to the kingdom of God. Forget my tears and my entreaties. Forget all that I have said or done. "I do not understand you," said Death. "Will you have your child back, or shall I carry him away to a place that you do not know?" Then the mother wrung her hands, fell on her knees, and prayed to God, "Grant not my prayers, when they are contrary to thy will, which at all times must be the best. Oh, hear them not." And her head sank on her bosom. Then Death carried away her child to the unknown land. The story of the wind, near the shores of the Great Belt, which is one of the straits that connect the Kattegat with the Baltic, stands an old mansion with thick red walls. "I know every stone of it," says the wind. "I saw it when it was part of the castle of Mark Stig on the promontory, but the castle was obliged to be pulled down, and the stone was used again for the walls of a new mansion on another spot, the baronial residence of Borreby, which still stands near the coast. I knew them well, those noble lords and ladies, the successive generations that dwelt there, and now I'm going to tell you of Waldemar Daa and his daughters. How proud was his bearing, for he was of royal blood, and could boast of more noble deeds than merely hunting the stag and emptying the wine cup. His rule was despotic. "It shall be," he was accustomed to say. His wife, in garments embroidered with gold, stepped proudly over the polished marble floors. The tapestries were gorgeous, and the furniture of costly and artistic taste. She had brought gold and plate with her into the house. The cellars were full of wine. Black, fiery horses neighed in the stables. There was a look of wealth about the house of Borreby at that time. They had 3 children, daughters, fair and delicate maidens, Ida, Joanna, and Anna Dorothea. I have never forgotten their names. They were a rich, noble family, born in affluence and nurtured in luxury. Were, were, roared the wind, and went on. I did not see in this house, as in other great houses, the high-born lady sitting among her women, turning the spinning wheel. She could sweep the sounding chords of the guitar and sing to the music, not always Danish melodies, but the songs of a strange land. It was live and let live here. Stranger guests came from far and near, music sounded, goblets clashed, and I, said the wind, was not able to drown the noise. Ostentation, pride, splendor, and display ruled, but not the fear of the Lord. It was on the evening of the first day of May, the wind continued. I came from the west, and had seen the ships overpowered with the waves, when all on board persisted or were cast shipwrecked on the coast of Jutland. I had hurried across the heath, and over Jutland's wood-girt eastern coast, and over the island of Funen, and then I drove across the great belt, sighing and moaning. At length I lay down to rest on the shores of Zealand, near to the great house of Borreby, where the splendid forest of oaks still flourished. The young men of the neighborhood were collecting branches and brushwood under the oak trees. The largest and driest they could find, they carried into the village and piled them up in a heap and set them on fire. Then the men and maidens danced and sung in a circle round the blazing pile. I lay quite quiet, said the wind, but I silently touched a branch which had been brought by one of the handsomest of the young men, and the wood blazed up brightly, blazed brighter than all the rest. Then he was chosen as the chief, and received the name of the shepherd, and might choose his lamb from among the maidens. There was greater mirth and rejoicing than I had ever heard in the halls of the rich baronial house. Then the noble lady drove by towards the baron's mansion with her 3 daughters, in a gilded carriage drawn by 6 horses. The daughters were young and beautiful, 3 charming blossoms, a rose, a lily, and a white hyacinth. The mother was a proud tulip, and never acknowledged the salutations of any of the men or maidens who paused in their sport to do her honour. The gracious lady seemed like a flower that was rather stiff in the stalk. Rose, lily, and hyacinth, yes, I saw them all three. Whose little lambs will they one day become? Thought I, their shepherd will be a gallant knight, perhaps a prince. The carriage rolled on, and the peasants resumed their dancing. They drove about the summer through all the villages near, but one night, when I rose again, the high-born lady lay down to rise again no more. That thing came to her which comes to us all, in which there is nothing new. Waldemar Dyer remained for a time silent and thoughtful. "The loftiest tree may be bowed without being broken," said a voice within him. His daughters wept. All the people in the mansion wiped their eyes. "But Lady Dyer had driven away, and I drove away too," said the wind. "Whir, whir, I returned again. I often returned and passed over the island of Funen and the shores of the Belt. Then I rested by Borreby, near the glorious wood, where the heron made his nest, the haunt of the wood pigeons, the bluebirds, and the black stork. It was yet spring. Some were sitting on their eggs, others had already hatched their young broods. But how they fluttered about and cried out when the axe sounded through the forest, blow upon blow! The trees of the forest were doomed. Waldemar Dyer wanted to build a noble ship, a man of war, a 3-decker, which the king would be sure to buy, and these, the trees of the wood, the landmark of the seamen, the refuge of the birds, must be felled. The hawk started up and flew away, for its nest was destroyed. The heron and all the birds of the forest became homeless, and flew about in fear and anger. I could well understand how they felt. Crows and ravens croaked as if in scorn, while the trees were cracking and falling around them. Far in the interior of the wood, where a noisy swarm of labourers were working, stood Waldemar Dyer and his 3 daughters, and all were laughing at the wild cries of the birds, excepting one, the youngest, Anna Dorothea, who felt grieved to the heart. And when they made preparations to fell a tree that was almost dead, and on whose naked branches the black stork had built her nest, she saw the poor little things stretching out their necks, and she begged for mercy for them with the tears in her eyes. So the tree with the black stork's nest was left standing. The tree itself, however, was not worth much to speak of. Then there was a great deal of hewing and sawing, and at last the 3-decker was built. The builder was a man of low origin, but possessing great pride. His eyes and forehead spoke of large intellect, and Waldemar Dyer was fond of listening to him, and so was Waldemar's daughter Ida, the eldest, now about 15 years old, and while he was building the ship for the father, he was building for himself a castle in the air, in which he and Ida were to live when they were married. This might have happened indeed, if there had been a real castle, with stone walls, ramparts, and a moat. But in spite of his clever head, the builder was still but a poor, inferior bird, and how can a sparrow expect to be admitted into the society of peacocks? "I passed on in my course," said the wind, "and he passed away also. He was not allowed to remain, and little Ida got over it, because she was obliged to do so. Proud, black horses, worth looking at, were neighing in the stable, and they were locked up, for the admiral, who had been sent by the king to inspect the new ship and make arrangements for its purchase, was loud in admiration of these beautiful horses. "I heard it all," said the wind, "for I accompanied the gentleman through the open door of the stable and strewed stalks of straw, like bars of gold, at their feet. Waldemar Dyer wanted gold, and the admiral wished for the proud black horses. Therefore he praised them so much. But the hint was not taken, and consequently the ship was not bought. It remained on the shore, covered with boards, a Noah's Ark that never got to the water. Whir, ah, 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 ah. And that was a pity. In the winter, when the fields were covered with snow, and the water filled with large blocks of ice which I had blown up to the coast, continued the wind, great flocks of crows and ravens, dark and black as they usually are, came and alighted on the lonely, deserted ship. Then they croaked in harsh accents of the forest that now existed no more, of the many pretty birds' nests destroyed, and the little ones left without a home, and all for the sake of that great bit of lumber, that proud ship that never sailed forth. I made the snowflakes whirl till the snow lay like a great lake round the ship and drifted over it. I let it hear my voice, that it might know what the storm has to say. Certainly I did my part towards teaching it seamanship. That winter passed away, and another winter and summer both passed, as they are still passing away, even as I pass away. The snow drifts onwards, the apple blossoms are scattered, the leaves fall, everything passes away, and men are passing away too. But the great man's daughters are still young, and little Ida is a rose, as fair to look upon as on the day when the shipbuilder first saw her. I often tumbled her long brown hair while she stood in the garden by the apple tree, musing, and not heeding how I strewed the blossoms on her hair and dishevelled it, or sometimes, while she stood gazing at the red sun and the golden sky through the opening branches of the dark, thick foliage of the garden trees. Her sister Joanna was bright and slender as a lily. She had a tall and lofty carriage and figure, though, like her mother, rather stiff in back. She was very fond of walking through the great hall, where hung the portraits of her ancestors. The women were represented in dresses of velvet and silk, with tiny little hats, embroidered with pearls on their braided hair. They were all handsome women. The gentlemen appeared clad in steel, or in rich cloaks lined with squirrel's fur. They wore little ruffs, and swords at their sides. Where would Joanna's place be on that wall some day? And how would he look, her noble lord and husband? This is what she thought of, and often spoke of in a low voice to herself. I heard it as I swept into the long hall and turned round to come out again. Anna Dorothea, the pale hyacinth, a child of 14, was quiet and thoughtful. Her large, deep blue eyes had a dreamy look, but a childlike smile still played round her mouth. I was not able to blow it away, neither did I wish to do so. We have met in the garden, in the hollow lane, in the field and meadow, where she gathered herbs and flowers which she knew would be useful to her father in preparing the drugs and mixtures he was always concocting. Waldemar Dyer was arrogant and proud, but he was also a learned man and knew a great deal. It was no secret, and many opinions were expressed on what he did. In his fireplace there was a fire, even in summer-time. He would lock himself in his room, and for days the fire would be kept burning. But he did not talk much of what he was doing. The secret powers of nature are generally discovered in solitude. And did he not soon expect to find out the art of making the greatest of all good things, the art of making gold? So he fondly hoped. Therefore the chimney smoked, and the fire crackled so constantly. "Yes, I was there too," said the wind. "Leave it alone," I sang down the chimney. "Leave it alone. It will all end in smoke, air, coals, and ashes, and you will burn your fingers." But Waldemar Dyer did not leave it alone, and all he possessed vanished like smoke blown by me. The splendid black horses, where are they? What became of the cows in the field, the old gold and silver vessels in cupboards and chests, and even the house and home itself? It was easy to melt all these away in the gold-making crucible, and yet obtain no gold. And so it was. Empty are the barns and storerooms, the cellars and cupboards, the servants decreased in number, and the mice multiplied. First one window became broken, and then another, so that I could get in at other places besides the door. Where the chimney smokes, the meal is being cooked, says the proverb. But here a chimney smoked that devoured all the meals for the sake of gold. I blew round the courtyard, said the wind, like a watchman blowing his home, but no watchman was there. I twirled the weathercock round on the summit of the tower, and it creaked like the snoring of a warder, but no warder was there, nothing but mice and rats. Poverty laid the tablecloth, poverty sat in the wardrobe and in the larder. The door fell off its hinges, cracks and fissures made their appearance everywhere, so that I could go in and out at pleasure, and that is how I know all about it. Amid smoke and ashes, sorrow and sleepless nights, the hair and beard of the master of the house turned grey, and deep furrows showed themselves around his temples. His skin turned pale and yellow, while his eyes still looked eagerly for gold, the longed-for gold, and the result of his labour was debt instead of gain. I blew the smoke and ashes into his face and beard. I moaned through the broken window panes and the yawning clefts in the walls. I blew into the chests and drawers belonging to his daughters, wherein lay the clothes that had become faded and threadbare from being worn over and over again. Such a song had not been sung at the children's cradle as I sung now. The lordly life had changed to a life of penury. I was the only one who rejoiced aloud in that castle, said the wind. At last I snowed them up, and they say snow keeps people warm. It was good for them, for they had no wood, and the forest from which they might have obtained it had been cut down. The frost was very bitter, and I rushed through loopholes and passages, over gables and roofs with keen and cutting swiftness. The 3 high-born daughters were lying in bed because of the cold, and their father crouching beneath his leather coverlet. Nothing to eat, nothing to burn, no fire on the hearth. Here was a life for high-born people. Give it up, give it up. But my Lord Dyer would not do that. After winter, spring will come, he said. After want, good times. We must not lose patience, we must learn to wait. Now my horses and lands are all mortgaged. It is indeed high time, but gold will come at last, at Easter. I heard him as he thus spoke. He was looking at a spider's web, and he continued, Thou cunning little weaver, thou dost teach me perseverance. Let any one tear thy web, and thou wilt begin again and repair it. Let it be entirely destroyed. Thou wilt resolutely begin to make another till it is completed. So ought we to do if we wish to succeed at last. It was the morning of Easter Day. The bells sounded from the neighbouring church, and the sun seemed to rejoice in the sky. The master of the castle had watched through the night in feverish excitement, and had been melting and cooling, distilling and mixing. I heard him sighing like a soul in despair. I heard him praying, and I noticed how he held his breath. The lamp burnt out, but he did not observe it. I blew up the fire in the coals on the hearth, and it threw a red glow on his ghastly white face, lighting it up with a glare, while his sunken eyes looked out wildly from their cavernous depths, and appeared to grow larger and more prominent, as if they would burst from their sockets. "Look at the alchemic glass," he cried. "Something glows in the crucible, pure and heavy." He lifted it with a trembling hand, and exclaimed in a voice of agitation, "Gold! Gold!" He was quite giddy. I could have blown him down, said the wind, but I only fanned the glowing coals, and accompanied him through the door to the room where his daughter sat shivering. His coat was powdered with ashes, and there were ashes in his beard and in his tangled hair. He stood erect and held high in the air the brittle glass that contained his costly treasure. "Found! Found! Gold! Gold!" he shouted, again holding the glass aloft, that it might flash in the sunshine. But his hand trembled, and the alchemic glass fell from it, clattering to the ground, and brake in 1,000 pieces. The last bubble of his happiness had burst, with a whiz and a whir, and I rushed away from the gold-maker's house. Late in the autumn, when the days were short, and the mist sprinkled cold drops on the berries and the leafless branches, I came back in fresh spirits, rushed through the air, swept the sky clear, and snapped off the dry twigs, which is certainly no great labour to do, yet it must be done. There was another kind of sweeping taking place at Waldemar Da's, in the castle of Borreby. His enemy, Olwe Ramel of Basnas, was there, with the mortgage of the house and everything it contained in his pocket. I rattled the broken windows, beat against the old rotten doors, and whistled through cracks and crevices, so that Mr. O. Ramel did not much like to remain there. Ida and Anna Dorothea wept bitterly. Joanna stood, pale and proud, biting her lips till the blood came. But what could that avail? Oh, Ramel offered Waldemar Da permission to remain in the house till the end of his life. No one thanked him for the offer, and I saw the ruined old gentleman lift his head and throw it back more proudly than ever. Then I rushed against the house and the old lime trees with such force that one of the thickest branches, a decayed one, was broken off, and the branch fell at the entrance, and remained there. It might have been used as a broom, if anyone had wanted to sweep the place out, and a grand sweeping out there really was. I thought it would be so. It was hard for anyone to preserve composure on such a day, but these people had strong wills, as unbending as their hard fortune. There was nothing they could call their own, excepting the clothes they wore. Yes, there was one thing more, an alchemist's glass, a new one, which had been lately bought, and filled with what could be gathered from the ground of the treasure which had promised so much, but failed in keeping its promise. Waldemar Da hid the glass in his bosom, and, taking his stick in his hand, the once rich gentleman passed with his daughters out of the house of Borreby. I blew coldly upon his flustered cheeks. I stroked his grey beard and his long white hair, and I sang as well as I was able. Gone away, gone away. Ida walked on one side of the old man, and Anna Dorothea on the other. Joanna turned round as they left the entrance. Why? Fortune would not turn because she turned. She looked at the stone in the walls which had once formed part of the castle of Mark Stig, and perhaps she thought of his daughters and of the old song. The oldest and youngest, hand in hand, went forth alone to a distant land. These were only two. Here there were three, and their father with them also. They walked along the high road, where once they had driven in their splendid carriage. They went forth with their father as beggars. They wandered across an open field to a mud hut, which they rented for $1.50 a year. A new home, with bare walls and empty cupboards. Crows and magpies fluttered about them and cried, as if in contempt, "Caw, caw, turned out of our nest, caw, caw," as they had done in the wood at Borreby when the trees were felled. Daya and his daughters could not help hearing it. So I blew about their ears to drown the noise. What use was it that they should listen? So they went to live in the mud hut in the open field, and I wandered away over moor and meadow, through bare bushes and leafless forests, to the open sea, to the broad shores in other lands. Whir-ah-ah, whir-ah-ah, away, away, year after year. And what became of Waldemar Dyer and his daughters? Listen, the wind will tell us. The last I saw of them was the pale hyacinth, Anna Dorothea. She was old and bent then, for 50 years had passed, and she had outlived them all. She could relate the history. Yonder, on the heath near the town of Wyborg, in Jutland, stood the fine new house of the canon. It was built of red brick with projecting gables. It was inhabited, for the smoke curled up thickly from the chimneys. The canon's gentle lady and her beautiful daughters sat in the bay window and looked over the hawthorn hedge of the garden towards the brown heath. What were they looking at? Their glances fell upon a stork's nest, which was built upon an old tumble-down hut. The roof, as far as one existed at all, was covered with moss and lichen. The stork's nest covered the greater part of it, and that alone was in a good condition, for it was kept in order by the stork himself. "That is a house to be looked at, and not to be touched," said the wind. For the sake of the stork's nest, it had been allowed to remain. Although it is a blot on the landscape, they did not like to drive the stork away. Therefore the old shed was left standing, and the poor woman who dwelt in it allowed to stay. She had the Egyptian bird to thank for that. Or was it perchance her reward for having once interceded for the preservation of the nest of its black brother in the forest of Borreby? At that time she, the poor woman, was a young child, a white hyacinth in a rich garden. She remembered that time well, for it was Anna Dorothea. "Oh, oh, oh," she sighed, for people can sigh like the moaning of the wind among the reeds and rushes. "Oh, oh, oh," she would say, "no bell sounded at thy burial, Waldemar Dyer. The poor schoolboys did not even sing a psalm when the former lord of Borreby was laid in the earth to rest. Oh, everything has an end, even misery. Sister Ida became the wife of a peasant. That was the hardest trial which befell our father, that the husband of his own daughter should be a miserable serf, whom his owner could place for punishment on the wooden horse. I suppose he is under the ground now. And Ida, alas, alas! It is not ended yet, miserable that I am. Kind heaven, grant me that I may die." That was Anna Dorothea's prayer in the wretched hut that was left standing for the sake of the stork. "I took pity on the proudest of the sisters," said the wind. "Her courage was like that of a man, and in man's clothes she served as a sailor on board ship. She was of few words, and of a dark countenance, but she did not know how to climb. So I blew her overboard before anyone found out that she was a woman, and, in my opinion, that was well done," said the wind. On such another Easter morning as that on which Waldemar Dyer imagined he had discovered the art of making gold, I heard the toes of a psalm under the stork's nest, and within the crumbling walls. It was Anna Dorothea's last song. There was no window in the hut, only a hole in the wall, and the sun rose like a globe of burnished gold and looked through. With what splendour he filled that dismal dwelling! Her eyes were glazing and her heart breaking. But so it would have been, even had the sun not shone that morning on Anna Dorothea. The stork's nest had secured her a home till her death. I sung over her grave. I sung at her father's grave. I know where it lies, and where her grave is too, but nobody else knows it. New times now. All is changed. The old high road is lost amid cultivated fields. The new one now winds along over covered graves, and soon the railway will come, with its train of carriages, and rush over graves where lie those whose very names are forgotten. All passed away, passed away. This is the story of Waldemar Dyer and his daughters. Tell it better, any of you, if you know how," said the wind, and he rushed away and was gone. The story of the year. It was near the end of January, and a terrible fall of snow was pelting down and whirling through the streets and lanes. The windows were plastered with snow on the outside. Snow fell in masses from the roofs. Everyone seemed in a great hurry. They ran, they flew, fell into each other's arms, holding fast for a moment, as long as they could stand safely. Coaches and horses looked as if they had been frosted with sugar. The footmen stood with their backs against the carriages so as to turn their faces from the wind. The foot passengers kept within the shelter of the carriages, which could only move slowly on in the deep snow. At last the storm abated, and a narrow path was swept clean in front of the houses. When two persons met in this path, they stood still, for neither liked to take the first step on one side into the deep snow to let the other pass him. There they stood, silent and motionless, till at last, as if by tacit consent, they each sacrificed a leg and buried it in the deep snow. Towards evening, the weather became calm. The sky, cleared from the snow, looked more lofty and transparent, while the stars shone with new brightness and purity. The frozen snow crackled underfoot, and was quite firm enough to bear the sparrows, who hopped upon it in the morning dawn. They searched for food in the path which had been swept, but there was very little for them, and they were terribly cold. "Tweet, tweet," said one to another. "They call this a new year, but I think it is worse than the last. We might just as well have kept the old year. I'm quite unhappy, and I have a right to be so." "Yes, you have, and yet the people ran about and fired off guns to usher in the new year," said a little shivering sparrow. They threw things against the doors, and were quite beside themselves with joy, because the old year had disappeared. I was glad too, for I expected we should have some warm days. But my hopes have come to nothing. It freezes harder than ever. I think mankind have made a mistake in reckoning time." "That they have," said a third, an old sparrow with a white poll. "They have something they call a calendar. It's an invention of their own, and everything must be arranged according to it, but it won't do. When spring comes, then the year begins. It is the voice of nature, and I reckon by that." "But when will spring come?" asked the others. "It will come when the stork returns, but he is very uncertain, and here in the town no one knows anything about it. In the country they have more knowledge. Shall we fly away there and wait? We shall be nearer to spring then, certainly." "That may be all very well," said another sparrow, who had been hopping about for a long time, chirping, but not saying anything of consequence. "But I have found a few comforts here in town which, I'm afraid, I should miss out in the country. Here in this neighborhood there lives a family of people who have been so sensible as to place 3 or 4 flower pots against the wall in the courtyard, so that the openings are all turned inward, and the bottom of each points outward. In the latter, a hole has been cut large enough for me to fly in and out. I and my husband have built a nest in one of these pots, and all our young ones, who have now flown away, were brought up there. The people who live there, of course, made the whole arrangement that they might have the pleasure of seeing us, or they would not have done it. It pleased them also to strew breadcrumbs for us, and so we have food, and may consider ourselves provided for. So I think my husband and I will stay where we are, although we are not very happy, but we shall stay. And we will fly into the country," said the others, "to see if spring is coming." And away they flew. In the country it was really winter, a few degrees colder than in the town. The sharp winds blew over the snow-covered fields. The farmer, wrapped in warm clothing, sat in his sleigh and beat his arms across his chest to keep off the cold. The whip lay on his lap. The horses ran till they smoked. The snow crackled. The sparrows hopped about in the wheel ruts and shivered, crying, "Tweet, tweet, when will spring come? It is very long in coming." "Very long indeed," sounded over the field from the nearest snow-covered hill. It might have been the echo which people heard, or perhaps the words of that wonderful old man who sat high on a heap of snow, regardless of wind or weather. He was all in white. He had on a peasant's coarse white coat of frieze. He had long white hair, a pale face, and large clear blue eyes. "Who is that old man?" asked the sparrows. "I know who he is," said an old raven who sat on the fence, and was condescending enough to acknowledge that we are all equal in the sight of heaven, even as little birds, and therefore he talked with the sparrows, and gave them the information they wanted. "I know who the old man is," he said. "It is Winter, the old man of last year. He is not dead yet, as the calendar says, but acts as guardian to little Prince Spring who is coming. Winter rules here still." "Oh, the cold makes you shiver, little ones, does it not?" "There, did I not tell you so?" said the smallest of the sparrows. "The calendar is only an invention of man, and is not arranged according to nature. They should leave these things to us. We are created so much more clever than they are." 1 week passed, and then another. The forest looked dark. The hard frozen lake lay like a sheet of lead. The mountains had disappeared, for over the land hung damp, icy mists. Large black crows flew about in silence. It was as if nature slept. At length a sunbeam glided over the lake, and it shone like burnished silver. But the snow on the fields and the hills did not glitter as before. The white form of Winter sat there still, with his unwandering gaze fixed on the south. He did not perceive that the snowy carpet seemed to sink, as it were, into the earth, that here and there a little green patch of grass appeared, and that these patches were covered with sparrows. Tee-wit, is spring coming at last? Spring! How? The cry resounded over field and meadow, and through the dark brown woods, where the fresh green moss still gleamed on the trunks of the trees, and from the south came the 2 first storks flying through the air, and on the back of each sat a lovely little child, a boy and a girl. They greeted the earth with a kiss, and wherever they placed their feet white flowers sprung up from beneath the snow. Hand in hand they approached the old iceman. Winter embraced him and clung to his breast, and as they did so, in a moment all 3 were enveloped in a thick, damp mist, dark and heavy, that closed over them like a veil. The wind arose with mighty rustling tone and cleared away the mist. Then the sun shone out warmly. Winter had vanished away, and the beautiful children of spring sat on the throne of the year. "This is really a new year," cried all the sparrows. "Now we shall get our rights, and have some return for what we suffered in winter." Wherever the 2 children wandered, green buds burst forth on bush and tree, the grass grew higher, and the cornfields became lovely in delicate green. The little maiden strewed flowers in her path. She held her apron before her. It was full of flowers. It was as if they sprung into life there. For the more she scattered around her, the more flowers did her apron contain. Eagerly she showered snowy blossoms over apple and peach trees, so that they stood in full beauty before even their green leaves had burst from the bud. Then the boy and the girl clapped their hands, and troops of birds came flying by. No one knew from whence, and they all twittered and chirped, singing, "Spring has come." How beautiful everything was! Many an old dame came forth from her door into the sunshine, and shuffled about with great delight, glancing at the golden flowers which glittered everywhere in the fields, as they used to do in her young days. The world grew young again to her as she said, "It is a blessed time out here today." The forest already wore its dress of dark green buds. The thyme blossomed in fresh fragrance. Primroses and anemones sprung forth, and violets bloomed in the shade, while every blade of grass was full of strength and sap. Who could resist sitting down on such a beautiful carpet? And then the young children of spring seated themselves, holding each other's hands, and sang and laughed and grew. A gentle rain fell upon them from the sky, but they did not notice it, for the raindrops were their own tears of joy. They kissed each other and were betrothed, and in the same moment the buds of the trees unfolded. And when the sun rose, The forest was green. Hand in hand, the two wandered beneath the fresh pendant canopy of foliage, while the sun's rays gleamed through the opening of the shade, in changing and varied colours. The delicate young leaves filled the air with refreshing odour. Merrily rippled the clear brooks and rivulets between the green, velvety rushes, and over the many-coloured pebbles beneath. All nature spoke of abundance and plenty. The cuckoo sang, and the lark carolled, for it was now beautiful spring. The careful willows had, however, covered their blossoms with woolly gloves, and this carefulness is rather tedious. Days and weeks went by, and the heat increased. Warm air waved the corn as it grew golden in the sun. The white northern lily spread its large green leaves over the glossy mirror of the woodland lake, and the fishes sought the shadows beneath them. In a sheltered part of the wood, the sun shone upon the walls of a farmhouse, brightening the blooming roses and ripening the black juicy berries which hung on the loaded cherry trees with his hot beams. Here sat the lovely wife of summer, the same whom we have seen as a child and a bride. Her eyes were fixed on dark, gathering clouds, which in wavy outlines of black and indigo were piling themselves up like mountains, higher and higher. They came from every side, always increasing like a rising, rolling sea. Then they swooped towards the forest, where every sound had been silenced as if by magic, every breath hushed, every bird mute. All nature stood still in grave suspense. But in the lanes and the highways, passengers on foot or in carriages were hurrying to find a place of shelter. Then came a flash of light, as if the sun had rushed forth from the sky, flaming, burning, all devouring, and darkness returned amid a rolling crash of thunder. The rain poured down in streams. Now there was darkness, then blinding light, now thrilling silence, then deafening din. The young brown reeds on the moor waved to and fro in feathery billows. The forest boughs were hidden in a watery mist. And still light and darkness followed each other. Still came the silence after the roar, while the corn and the blades of grass lay beaten down and swamped, so that it seemed impossible they could ever raise themselves again. But after a while the rain began to fall gently. The sun's rays pierced the clouds, and the water drops glittered like pearls on leaf and stem. The birds sang, the fishes leaped up to the surface of the water, the gnats danced in the sunshine, and yonder, on a rock by the heaving salt sea, sat Summer himself, a strong man with sturdy limbs and long dripping hair. Strengthened by the cool bath, he sat in the warm sunshine, while all around him renewed nature bloomed strong, luxuriant, and beautiful. It was summer, warm, lovely summer. Sweet and pleasant was the fragrance wafted from the clover field, where the bees swarmed round the ruined tower. The bramble twined itself over the old altar, which, washed by the rain, glittered in the sunshine. And thither flew the queen bee with her swarm, and prepared wax and honey. But Summer and his bosom wife saw it with different eyes. To them the altar table was covered with the offerings of nature. The evening sky shone like gold. No church dome could ever gleam so brightly, and between the golden evening and the blushing morning there was moonlight. It was indeed summer. And days and weeks passed. The bright scythes of the reapers glittered in the cornfields. The branches of the apple trees bent low, heavy with the red and golden fruit. The hop, hanging in clusters, filled the air with sweet fragrance, and beneath the hazel bushes, where the nuts hung in great bunches, rested a man and a woman, Summer and his grave consort. "See," she exclaimed, "what wealth, what blessings surround us! Everything is homelike and good, and yet, I know not why, I long for rest and peace. I can scarcely express what I feel. They are already ploughing the fields again. More and more the people wish for gain. See, the storks are flocking together and following the plough at a short distance. They are the birds from Egypt, who carried us through the air. Do you remember how we came as children to this land of the north? We brought with us flowers and bright sunshine, and green to the forests, but the wind has been rough with them, and they are now become dark and brown, like the trees of the south. But they do not, like them, bear golden fruit. Do you wish to see golden fruit? Said the man. Then rejoice, and he lifted his arm. The leaves of the forest put on colours of red and gold, and bright tints covered the woodlands. The rose bushes gleamed with scarlet hips, and the branches of the elder trees hung down with the weight of the full, dark berries. The wild chestnuts fell ripe from their dark green shells, and in the forests the violets bloomed for the second time. But the queen of the year became more and more silent and pale. "It blows cold," she said, "and night brings the damp mist. I long for the land of my childhood." Then she saw the storks fly away, everyone, and she stretched out her hands towards them. She looked at the empty nests. In one of them grew a long-stalked cornflower, in another the yellow mustard seed, as if the nest had been placed there only for its comfort and protection, and the sparrows were flying round them all. "Tweet, where has the master of the nest gone?" cried one. "I suppose he could not bear it when the wind blew, and therefore he has left this country. I wish him a pleasant journey." The forest leaves became more and more yellow. Leaf after leaf fell, and the stormy winds of autumn howled. The year was now far advanced, and upon the fallen, yellow leaves lay the queen of the year, looking up with mild eyes at a gleaming star, and her husband stood by her. A gust of wind swept through the foliage, and the leaves fell in a shower. The summer queen was gone, but a butterfly, the last of the year, flew through the cold air. Damp fogs came, icy winds blew, and the long, dark nights of winter approached. The ruler of the year appeared with hair white as snow, but he knew it not. He thought snowflakes falling from the sky covered his head as they decked the green fields with a thin, white covering of snow. And then the church bells rang out for Christmas time. "The bells are ringing for the new-born year," said the ruler. "Soon will a new ruler and his bride be born, and I shall go to rest with my wife in yonder light-giving star." In the fresh, green fir wood, where the snow lay all around, stood the angel of Christmas, and consecrated the young trees that were to adorn his feast. "May there be joy in the rooms and under the green boughs," said the old ruler of the year. In a few weeks he had become a very old man, with hair as white as snow. "My resting time draws near. The young pair of the year will soon claim my crown and sceptre." "But the night is still thine," said the angel of Christmas, "for power, but not for rest. Let the snow lie warmly upon the tender seed. Learn to endure the thought that another is worshipped whilst thou art still Lord. Learn to endure being forgotten while yet thou livest. The hour of thy freedom will come when spring appears." "And when will spring come?" asked Winter. "It will come when the stork returns. And with white locks and snowy beard, cold, bent and hoary, but strong as the wintry storm and firm as the ice, old Winter sat on the snowdrift-covered hill, looking towards the south, where Winter had sat before, and gazed. The ice glittered, the snow crackled, the skaters skimmed over the polished surface of the lakes, ravens and crows formed a pleasing contrast to the white ground, and not a breath of wind stirred, and in the still air old Winter clenched his fists, and the ice lay fathoms deep between the lands. Then came the sparrows again out of the town, and asked, "Who is that old man?" The raven sat there still, or it might be his son, which is the same thing. And he said to them, "It is Winter, the old man of the former year. He is not dead, as the calendar says, but he is guardian to the spring, which is coming." "When will spring come?" asked the sparrows, "for we shall have better times then, and a better rule. The old times are worth nothing." And in quiet thought, old Winter looked at the leafless forest, where the graceful form and bends of each tree and branch could be seen. And while Winter slept, icy mists came from the clouds, and the ruler dreamt of his youthful days and of his manhood, and in the morning dawn the whole forest glittered with hoarfrost, which the sun shook from the branches, and this was the summer dream of Winter. "When will spring come?" asked the sparrows. "Spring!" Again the echo sounded from the hills on which the snow lay. The sunshine became warmer, the snow melted, and the birds twittered, "Spring is coming!" And high in the air flew the first stork, and the second followed. A lovely child sat on the back of each, and they sank down on the open field, kissed the earth, and kissed the quiet old man, and, as the mist from the mountain top, he vanished away and disappeared. And the story of the year was finished. "This is all very fine, no doubt," said the sparrows, "and it is very beautiful, but it is not according to the calendar, therefore it must be all wrong." The Sunbeam and the Captive. It is autumn. We stand on the ramparts and look out over the sea. We look at the numerous ships, and at the Swedish coast on the opposite side of the Sound, rising far above the surface of the waters which mirror the glow of the evening sky. Behind us, the wood is sharply defined. Mighty trees surround us, and the yellow leaves flutter down from the branches. Below, at the foot of the wall, stands a gloomy-looking building enclosed in palisades. The space between is dark and narrow, but still more dismal must it be behind the iron gratings in the wall which cover the narrow loopholes or windows. For in these dungeons the most depraved of the criminals are confined. A ray of the setting sun shoots into the bare cells of one of the captives. For God's sun shines upon the evil and the good. The hardened criminal casts an impatient look at the bright ray. Then a little bird flies towards the grating, for birds twitter to the just as well as to the unjust. He only cries, "Tweet, tweet," and then perches himself near the grating, flutters his wings, pecks a feather from one of them, puffs himself out, and sets his feathers on end round his breast and throat. The bad, chained man looks at him, and a more gentle expression comes into his hard face. In his breast there rises a thought which he himself cannot rightly analyze, but the thought has some connection with the sunbeam, with the bird, and with the scent of violets which grow luxuriantly in spring at the foot of the wall. Then there comes the sound of the hunter's horn, merry and full. The little bird starts and flies away. The sunbeam gradually vanishes, and again there is darkness in the room and in the heart of that bad man. Still, the sun has shone into that heart, and the twittering of the bird has touched it. Sound on, ye glorious strains of the hunter's horn, continue your stirring tones, for the evening is mild, and the surface of the sea, heaving slowly and calmly, is smooth as a mirror. The swan's nest. Between the Baltic and the North Sea there lies an old swan's nest, wherein swans are born and have been born that shall never die. In olden times, a flock of swans flew over the Alps to the green plains around Milan, where it was delightful to dwell. This flight of swans men called the Lombards. Another flock, with shining plumage and honest eyes, soared southward to Byzantium. The swans established themselves there close by the emperor's throne, and spread their wings over him as shields to protect him. They received the name of Varangians. On the coast of France there sounded a cry of fear, for the blood-stained swans that came from the north with fire under their wings, and the people prayed, "Heaven deliver us from the wild Northmen." On the fresh sward of England stood the Danish swan by the open seashore, with the crown of 3 kingdoms on his head, and he stretched out his golden sceptre over the land. The heathens on the Pomerian coast bent the knee, and the Danish swans came with the banner of the cross and with the drawn sword. That was in the very old times, you say. In later days, 2 mighty swans have been seen to fly from the nest. A light shone far through the air, far over the lands of the earth. The swan, with the strong beating of his wings, scattered the twilight mists, and the starry sky was seen, and it was as if it came nearer to the earth. That was the swan Tycho Brahe. Yes, then, you say, but in our own days we have seen swan after swan soar by in glorious flight. One let his pinions glide over the strings of the golden harp, and it resounded through the north. Norway's mountains seemed to rise higher in the sunlight of former days. There was a rustling among the pine trees and the birches. The gods of the north, the heroes, and the noble women showed themselves in the dark forest depths. We have seen a swan beat with his wings upon the marble crag, so that it burst, and the forms of beauty imprisoned in the stone stepped out to the sunny day. And men in the lands round about lifted up their heads to behold these mighty forms. We have seen a 3rd swan spinning the thread of thought that is fastened from country to country round the world, so that the word may fly with lightning speed from land to land. And our Lord loves the old swan's nest between the Baltic and the North Sea. And when the mighty birds come soaring through the air to destroy it, even the callow young stand round in a circle on the margin of the nest. And though their breasts may be struck so that their blood flows, they bear it, and strike with their wings and their claws. Centuries will pass by. Swans will fly forth from the nest. Men will see them and hear them in the world, before it shall be said in spirit and in truth, "This is the last swan, the last song from the swan's nest." The swineherd. Once upon a time lived a poor prince. His kingdom was very small, but it was large enough to enable him to marry, and marry he would. It was rather bold of him that he went and asked the emperor's daughter, "Will you marry me?" But he ventured to do so, for his name was known far and wide, and there were hundreds of princesses who would have gladly accepted him. But would she do so? Now we shall see. On the grave of the prince's father grew a rose tree, the most beautiful of its kind. It bloomed only once in 5 years, and then it had only one single rose upon it. But what a rose! It had such a sweet scent that one instantly forgot all sorrow and grief when one smelt it. He had also a nightingale, which could sing as if every sweet melody was in its throat. This rose and the nightingale he wished to give to the princess, and therefore both were put into big silver cases and sent to her. The emperor ordered them to be carried into the great hall where the princess was just playing. "Visitors are coming, with her ladies in waiting." When she saw the large cases with the presents therein, she clapped her hands for joy. "I wish it were a little pussy-cat," she said. But then the rose tree with the beautiful rose was unpacked. "Oh, how nicely it is made!" exclaimed the ladies. "It is more than nice," said the emperor. "It is charming." The princess touched it and nearly began to cry. "For shame, Pa," she said. "It is not artificial, it is natural." "For shame, it is natural," repeated all her ladies. "Let us first see what the other case contains before we are angry," said the emperor. Then the nightingale was taken out, and it sang so beautifully that no one could possibly say anything unkind about it. "Superbe, charmant," said the ladies of the court, for they all prattled French, one worse than the other. "How much the bird reminds me of the musical box of the late lamented empress," said an old courtier. "It has exactly the same tone, the same execution." "You are right," said the emperor, and began to cry like a little child. "I hope it is not natural," said the princess. "Yes, certainly it is natural," replied those who had brought the presents. "Then let it fly," said the princess, and refused to see the prince. But the prince was not discouraged. He painted his face, put on common clothes, pulled his cap over his forehead, and came back. "Good day, Emperor," he said. "Could you not give me some employment at the court?" "There are so many," replied the emperor, "who apply for places, that for the present I have no vacancy. But I will remember you. But wait a moment. It just comes into my mind. I require somebody to look after my pigs, for I have a great many." Thus the prince was appointed imperial swineherd, and as such he lived in a wretchedly small room near the pigsty. There he worked all day long, and when it was night he had made a pretty little pot. There were little bells round the rim, and when the water began to boil in it, the bells began to play the old tune. "A jolly old sow once lived in a sty, 3 little piggies had she, since." But what was more wonderful was that, when one put a finger into the steam rising from the pot, one could at once smell what meals they were preparing on every fire in the whole town. That was indeed much more remarkable than the rose. When the princess with her ladies passed by and heard the tune, she stopped and looked quite pleased, for she also could play it. In fact, it was the only tune she could play, and she played it with one finger. "That is the tune I know," she exclaimed. "He must be a well-educated swineherd. Go and ask him how much the instrument is." One of the ladies had to go and ask, but she put on pattens. "What will you take for your pot?" asked the lady. "I will have 10 kisses from the princess," said the swineherd. "God forbid," said the lady. "Well, I cannot sell it for less," replied the swineherd. "What did he say?" said the princess. "I really cannot tell you," replied the lady. "You can whisper it into my ear." "It is very naughty," said the princess, and walked off. But when she had gone a little distance, the bells rang again so sweetly. "A jolly old sow once lived in a sty, 3 little piggies had she, and see." "Ask him," said the princess, "if he will be satisfied with 10 kisses from one of my ladies." "No, thank you," said the swineherd. 10 kisses from the princess, or I keep my pot." "That is tiresome," said the princess. "But you must stand before me so that nobody can see it." The ladies placed themselves in front of her and spread out their dresses, and she gave the swineherd 10 kisses and received the pot. That was a pleasure. Day and night the water in the pot was boiling. There was not a single fire in the whole town of which they did not know what was preparing on it, the chamberlains as well as the shoemakers. The ladies danced and clapped their hands for joy. "We know who will eat soup and pancakes. We know who will eat porridge and cutlets. Oh, how interesting!" "Very interesting indeed," said the mistress of the household. "But you must not betray me, for I am the emperor's daughter." "Of course not," they all said. "The swineherd, that is to say, the prince." But they did not know otherwise than that he was a real swineherd, did not waste a single day without doing something. He made a rattle, which, when turned quickly round, played all the waltzes, gallops, and polkas known since the creation of the world. "But that is superbe," said the princess passing by. I have never heard a more beautiful composition. Go down and ask him what the instrument costs, but I shall not kiss him again." "He will have 100 kisses from the princess," said the lady, who had gone down to ask him. "I believe he is mad," said the princess, and walked off, but soon she stopped. "One must encourage art," she said. "I am the emperor's daughter. Tell him I will give him 10 kisses, as I did the other day. The remainder one of my ladies can give him." "But we do not like to kiss him," said the ladies. "That is nonsense," said the princess. "If I can kiss him, you can also do it. Remember that I give you food and employment." And the lady had to go down once more. 100 kisses from the princess," said the swineherd, "or everybody keeps his own." "Place yourselves before me," said the princess then. They did as they were bidden, and the princess kissed him. "I wonder what that crowd near the pigsty means," said the emperor, who had just come out on his balcony. He rubbed his eyes and put his spectacles on. "The ladies of the court are up to some mischief, I think. I shall have to go down and see." He pulled up his shoes, for they were down at the heels, and he was very quick about it. When he had come down into the courtyard, he walked quite softly, and the ladies were so busily engaged in counting the kisses that all should be fair, that they did not notice the emperor. He raised himself on tiptoe. "What does this mean?" he said, when he saw that his daughter was kissing the swineherd, and then hit their heads with his shoe just as the swineherd received the 68th kiss. "Go out of my sight," said the emperor, for he was very angry, and both the princess and the swineherd were banished from the empire. There she stood and cried. The swineherd scolded her, and the rain came down in torrents. "Alas, unfortunate creature that I am," said the princess. "I wish I had accepted the prince. Oh, how wretched I am." The swineherd went behind a tree, wiped his face, threw off his poor attire, and stepped forth in his princely garments. He looked so beautiful that the princess could not help bowing to him. "I have now learnt to despise you," he said. "You refused an honest prince. You did not appreciate the rose and the nightingale, but you did not mind kissing a swineherd for his toys. You have no one but yourself to blame." And then he returned into his kingdom and left her behind. She could now sing at her leisure. A jolly old sow once lived in a sty. 3 little piggies has she. The Thistle's experiences belonging to the lordly manor house was beautiful, well-kept garden with rare trees and flowers. The guests of the proprietor declared their admiration of it. The people of the neighborhood, from town and country, came on Sundays and holidays and asked permission to see the garden. Indeed, whole schools used to pay visits to it. Outside the garden, by the palings at the roadside, stood a great mighty thistle, which spread out in many directions from the root, so that it might have been called a thistle bush. Nobody looked at it, except the old ass which drew the milkmaid's cart. This ass used to stretch out his neck towards the thistle and say, "You are beautiful. I should like to eat you." But his halter was not long enough to let him reach it and eat it. There was great company at the manor house, some very noble people from the capital, young pretty girls, and among them a young lady who came from a long distance. She had come from Scotland, and was of high birth, and was rich in land and in gold. "A bride worth winning," said more than one of the young gentlemen, and their lady mothers said the same thing. The young people amused themselves on the lawn and played at ball. They wandered among the flowers, and each of the young girls broke off a flower and fastened it in a young gentleman's buttonhole. But the young Scotch lady looked round for a long time in an undecided way. None of the flowers seemed to suit her taste. Then her eye glanced across the paling. Outside stood the great thistle bush with the reddish-blue sturdy flowers. She saw them. She smiled and asked the son of the house to pluck one for her. "It is the flower of Scotland," she said. "It blooms in the scutcheon of my country. Give me yonder flower." And he brought the fairest blossom, and pricked his fingers as completely as if it had grown on the sharpest rosebush. She placed the thistle flower in the buttonhole of the young man, and he felt himself highly honoured. Each of the other young gentlemen would willingly have given his own beautiful flower to have worn this one, presented by the fair hand of the Scottish maiden. And if the son of the house felt himself honoured, what were the feelings of the thistle bush? It seemed to him as if dew and sunshine were streaming through him. "I am something more than I knew of," said the thistle to itself. "I suppose my right place is really inside the palings and not outside. One is often strangely placed in this world. But now I have at least managed to get one of my people within the pale and indeed into a buttonhole." The thistle told this event to every blossom that unfolded itself. And not many days had gone by before the thistle heard, not from men, not from the twittering of the birds, but from the air itself, which stores up the sounds and carries them far around, out of the most retired walks of the garden, and out of the rooms of the house, in which doors and windows stood open, that the young gentleman who had received the thistle flower from the hand of the fair Scottish maiden had also now received the heart and hand of the lady in question. They were a handsome pair. It was a good match. "That match I made up," said the thistle, and he thought of the flower he had given for the buttonhole. Every flower that opened heard of this occurrence. "I shall certainly be transplanted into the garden," thought the thistle, "and perhaps put into a pot which crowds one in. That is said to be the greatest of all honours." And the thistle pictured this to himself in such a lively manner that at last he said with full conviction, "I am to be transplanted into a pot." Then he promised every little thistle flower which unfolded itself that it also should be put into a pot and perhaps into a buttonhole, the highest honour that could be attained. But not one of them was put into a pot, much less into a buttonhole. They drank in the sunlight and the air, lived on the sunlight by day, and on the dew by night, bloomed, were visited by bees and hornets who looked after the honey, the dowry of the flower. And they took the honey and left the flower where it was. "The thievish rabble," said the thistle. "If I could only stab every one of them, but I cannot." The flowers hung their heads and faded, but after a time new ones came. "You come in good time," said the thistle. "I am expecting every moment to get across the fence." A few innocent daisies and a long, thin dandelion stood and listened in deep admiration and believed everything they heard. The old ass of the milk cart stood at the edge of the field road and glanced across at the blooming thistle bush, but his halter was too short, and he could not reach it. And the thistle thought so long of the thistle of Scotland, to whose family he said he belonged, that he fancied at last that he had come from Scotland, and that his parents had been put into the national escutcheon. That was a great thought, but, you see, a great thistle has a right to a great thought. One is often of so grand a family that one may not know it, said the nettle, who grew close by. He had a kind of idea that he might be made into cambric if he were rightly treated. And the summer went by, and the autumn went by. The leaves fell from the trees, and the few flowers left had deeper colours and less scent. The gardener's boys sang in the garden, across the palings, "Up the hill, down the dale we wend, that is life from beginning to end." The young fir trees in the forest began to long for Christmas, but it was a long time to Christmas yet. "Here I am standing yet," said the thistle. "It is as if nobody thought of me, and yet I managed the match." They were betrothed, and they have had their wedding. It is now a week ago. I won't take a single step, because I can't." A few more weeks went by. The thistle stood there with his last single flower, large and full. This flower had shot up from near the roots. The wind blew cold over it, and the colours vanished, and the flower grew in size and looked like a silvered sunflower. One day the young pair, now man and wife, came into the garden. They went along by the paling, and the young wife looked across it. "There's the great thistle still growing," she said. "It has no flowers now." "Oh, yes, the ghost of the last one is there still," said he, and he pointed to the silvery remains of the flower, which looked like a flower themselves. "It is pretty, certainly," she said. "Such an one must be carved on the frame of our picture." And the young man had to climb across the palings again, and to break off the calyx of the thistle. It pricked his fingers, but then he had called it a ghost. And this thistle calyx came into the garden, and into the house, and into the drawing-room. There stood a picture. Young couple. A thistle flower was painted in the buttonhole of the bridegroom. They spoke about this, and also about the thistle flower they brought, the last thistle flower, now gleaming like silver, whose picture was carved on the frame. And the breeze carried what was spoken away, far away. "What one can experience," said the thistlebush. "My firstborn was put into a buttonhole, and my youngest has been put in a frame. Where shall I go?" And the ass stood by the roadside, and looked across at the thistle. "Come to me, my nibble darling," said he. "I can't get across to you." But the thistle did not answer. He became more and more thoughtful, kept on thinking and thinking till near Christmas, and then a flower of thought came forth. "If the children are only good, the parents do not mind standing outside the garden pale." "That's an honourable thought," said the sunbeam. "You shall also have a good place." "In a pot or in a frame?" asked the thistle. "In a story," replied the sunbeam. "The thorny road of honour. An old story yet lives of the thorny road of honour, of a marksman, who indeed attained to rank and office, but only after a lifelong and weary strife against difficulties. Who has not, in reading this story, thought of his own strife, and of his own numerous difficulties? The story is very closely akin to reality, but still it has its harmonious explanation here on earth, while reality often points beyond the confines of life to the regions of eternity. The history of the world is like a magic lantern that displays to us, in light pictures upon the dark ground of the present, how the benefactors of mankind, the martyrs of genius, wandered along the thorny road of honour. From all periods and from every country, these shining pictures display themselves to us. Each only appears for a few moments, but each represents a whole life, sometimes a whole age, with its conflicts and victories. Let us contemplate here and there one of the company of martyrs, the company which will receive new members until the world itself shall pass away. We look down upon a crowded amphitheatre. Out of the clouds of Aristophanes, satire and humour are pouring down in streams upon the audience. On the stage, Socrates, the most remarkable man in Athens, he who had been the shield and defence of the people against the 30 tyrants, is held up mentally and bodily to ridicule. Socrates, who saved Alcibiades and Xenophon in the turmoil of battle, and whose genius soared far above the gods of the ancients. He himself is present. He has risen from the spectators' bench, and has stepped forward, that the laughing Athenians may well appreciate the likeness between himself and the caricature on the stage. There he stands before them, towering high above them all. "Thou juicy, green, poisonous hemlock, throw thy shadow over Athens, not thou, olive tree of fame. 7 cities contended for the honour of giving birth to Homer, that is to say, they contended after his death. Let us look at him as he was in his lifetime. He wanders on foot through the cities and recites his verses for a livelihood. The thought for the morrow turns his hair grey. He, the great seer, is blind and painfully pursues his way. The sharp thorn tears the mantle of the king of poets. His song yet lives, and through that alone live all the heroes and gods of antiquity. One picture after another springs up from the east, from the west, far removed from each other in time and place, and yet each one forming a portion of the thorny road of honour, on which the thistle indeed displays a flower, but only to adorn the grave. The camels pass along under the palm trees. They are richly laden with indigo and other treasures of value, sent by the ruler of the land to him whose songs are the delight of the people, the fame of the country. He whom envy and falsehood have driven into exile has been found, and the caravan approaches the little town in which he has taken refuge. A poor corpse is carried out of the town gate, and the funeral procession causes the caravan to halt. The dead man is he whom they have been sent to seek, Firdousi, who has wandered the thorny road of honour even to the end. The African, with blunt features, thick lips, and woolly hair, sits on the marble steps of the palace in the capital of Portugal and begs. He is the submissive slave of Camoens, and but for him, and for the copper coins thrown to him by the passers-by, his master, the poet of the Lusiad, would die of hunger. Now, a costly monument marks the grave of Camoens. There is a new picture. Behind the iron grating, a man appears, pale as death, with long, unkempt beard. "I have made a discovery," he says, "the greatest that has been made for centuries, and they have kept me locked up here for more than 20 years. Who is the man?" "A madman," replies the keeper of the madhouse. "What whimsical ideas these lunatics have! He imagines that one can propel things by means of steam. It is Solomon de Caires, the discoverer of the power of steam, whose theory, expressed in dark words, is not understood by Richelieu, and he dies in the madhouse. Here stands Columbus, whom the street boys used once to follow and jeer, because he wanted to discover a new world, and he has discovered it. Shouts of joy greet him from the breasts of all, and the clash of bells sounds to celebrate his triumphant return. But the clash of the bells of envy soon drowns the others. The discoverer of a world, he who lifted the American gold land from the sea and gave it to his king, he is rewarded with iron chains. He wishes that these chains may be placed in his coffin, for they witness to the world of the way in which a man's contemporaries reward good service. One picture after another comes crowding on. The thorny path of honour and of fame is overfilled. Here, in dark night, sits the man who measured the mountains in the moon. He who forced his way out into the endless space among stars and planets. He, the mighty man who understood the spirit of nature and felt the earth moving beneath his feet. Galileo. Blind and deaf he sits, an old man thrust through with a spear of suffering, and amid the torments of neglect, scarcely able to lift his foot, that foot with which, in the anguish of his soul, when men denied the truth, he stamped upon the ground with the exclamation, "Yet it moves!" Here stands a woman of childlike mind, yet full of faith and inspiration. She carries the banner in front of the combating army and brings victory and salvation to her fatherland. The sound of shouting arises, and the pile flames up. "They are burning the witch, Joan of Arc." Yes, and a future century jeers at the white lily. Voltaire, the satyr of human intellect, writes, "La Pucelle." At the Thing or Assembly, at Viborg, the Danish nobles burn the laws of the king. They flame up high, illuminating the period and the lawgiver, and throw a glory into the dark prison tower, where an old man is growing grey and bent. With his finger he marks out a groove in the stone table. It is the popular king who sits there, once the ruler of 3 kingdoms, the friend of the citizen and the peasant. It is Christian II. Enemies wrote his history. Let us remember his improvements of 7 and 20 years, if we cannot forget his crime. A ship sails away, quitting the Danish shores. A man leans against the mast, casting a last glance towards the island Hwain. It is Tycho Brahe. He raised the name of Denmark to the stars and was rewarded with injury, loss, and sorrow. He is going to a strange country. The vault of heaven is above me everywhere, he says, and what do I want more? And away sails the famous Dane, the astronomer, to live honoured and free in a strange land. Aye, free, if only from the unbearable sufferings of the body. Comes in a sigh through time, and strikes upon our ear. What a picture! Griffenfeld, a Danish Prometheus, bound to the rocky island of Munkholm. We are in America, on the margin of one of the largest rivers. An innumerable crowd has gathered, for it is said that a ship is to sail against the wind and weather, bidding defiance to the elements. The man who thinks he can solve the problem is named Robert Fulton. The ship begins its passage, but suddenly it stops. The crowd begins to laugh and whistle and hiss. The very father of the man whistles with the rest. Conceit, foolery, is the cry. It has happened just as he deserved. Put the crack-brain under lock and key. Then suddenly a little nail breaks, which had stopped the machine for a few moments, and now the wheels turn again. The floats break the force of the waters, and the ship continues its course, and the beam of the steam engine shortens the distance between far lands from hours into minutes. O human race, canst thou grasp the happiness of such a minute of consciousness, this penetration of the soul by its mission? The moment in which all dejection, and every wound, even those caused by one's own fault, is changed into health and strength and clearness. When discord is converted to harmony, the minute in which men seem to recognize the manifestation of the heavenly grace in one man, and feel how this one imparts it to all. Thus the thorny path of honour shows itself as a glory surrounding the earth with its beams. Thrice happy he who is chosen to be a wanderer there, and, without merit of his own, to be placed between the builder of the bridge and the earth, between Providence and the human race. On mighty wings the spirit of history floats through the ages, and shows, giving courage and comfort and awakening gentle thoughts on the dark nightly background, but in gleaming pictures, the thorny path of honour, which does not, like a fairy tale, end in brilliancy and joy here on earth, but stretches out beyond all time, even into eternity. The tinderbox. A soldier came marching along the high road, left, right, left, right. He had his knapsack on his back and a sword at his side. He had been to the wars, and was now returning home. As he walked on, he met a very frightful-looking old witch in the road. Her underlip hung quite down on her breast, and she stopped and said, "Good evening, soldier. You have a very fine sword and a large knapsack, and you are a real soldier, so you shall have as much money as ever you like." "Thank you, old witch," said the soldier. "Do you see that large tree?" said the witch, pointing to a tree which stood beside them. "Well, it is quite hollow inside, and you must climb to the top, when you will see a hole through which you can let yourself down into the tree to a great depth. I will tie a rope round your body, so that I can pull you up again when you call out to me." "But what am I to do down there in the tree?" asked the soldier. "Get money," she replied, "for you must know that when you reach the ground under the tree, you will find yourself in a large hall lighted up by 300 lamps. You will then see 3 doors, which can be easily opened, for the keys are in all the locks. On entering the first of the chambers, to which these doors lead, you will see a large chest standing in the middle of the floor, and upon it a dog seated with a pair of eyes as large as teacups. But you need not be at all afraid of him. I will give you my blue checked apron, which you must spread upon the floor, and then boldly seize hold of the dog and place him upon it. You can then open the chest and take from it as many pence as you please. They are only copper pence. But if you would rather have silver money, you must go into the second chamber. Here you will find another dog, with eyes as big as mill wheels, but do not let that trouble you. Place him upon my apron, and then take what money you please. If, however, you like gold best, enter the third chamber, where there is another chest full of it. The dog who sits on this chest is very dreadful. His eyes are as big as a tower, but do not mind him. If he also is placed upon my apron, he cannot hurt you, and you may take from the chest what gold you will." "This is not a bad story," said the soldier, "but what am I to give you?" "You old witch, for, of course, you do not mean to tell me all this for nothing." "No," said the witch, "but I do not ask for a single penny. Only promise to bring me an old tinder box, which my grandmother left behind the last time she went down there." "Very well, I promise. Now tie the rope round my body." "Here it is," replied the witch, "and here is my blue checked apron." As soon as the rope was tied, the soldier climbed up the tree and let himself down through the hollow to the ground beneath, and here he found, as the witch had told him, a large hall in which many hundred lamps were all burning. Then he opened the first door. Ah! There sat the dog with the eyes as large as teacups, staring at him. "You're a pretty fellow," said the soldier, seizing him and placing him on the witch's apron, while he filled his pockets from the chest with as many pieces as they would hold. Then he closed the lid, seated the dog upon it again, and walked into another chamber. And, sure enough, there sat the dog with eyes as big as mill wheels. "You had better not look at me in that way," said the soldier. "You will make your eyes water." And then he seated him also upon the apron and opened the chest. But when he saw what a quantity of silver money it contained, he very quickly threw away all the coppers he had taken, and filled his pockets and his knapsack with nothing but silver. Then he went into the third room, and there the dog was really hideous. His eyes were truly as big as towers, and they turned round and round in his head like wheels. "Good morning," said the soldier, touching his cap, for he had never seen such a dog in his life. But after looking at him more closely, he thought he had been civil enough, so he placed him on the floor and opened the chest. Good gracious, what a quantity of gold there was! Enough to buy all the sugar sticks of the sweet stuff women, all the tin soldiers, whips, and rocking horses in the world, or even the whole town itself. There was indeed an immense quantity. So the soldier now threw away all the silver money he had taken, and filled his pockets and his knapsack with gold instead. And not only his pockets and his knapsack, but even his cap and boots, so that he could scarcely walk. He was really rich now, so he replaced the dog on the chest, closed the door, and called up through the tree, "Now pull me out, you old witch." "Have you got the tinder box?" asked the witch. "No, I declare I quite forgot it." So he went back and fetched the tinder box, And then the witch drew him up out of the tree, and he stood again in the high road, with his pockets, his knapsack, his cap, and his boots full of gold. "What are you going to do with the tinder box?" asked the soldier. "That is nothing to you," replied the witch. "You have the money. Now give me the tinder box." "I tell you what," said the soldier, "if you don't tell me what you are going to do with it, I will draw my sword and cut off your head." "No," said the witch. The soldier immediately cut off her head, and there she lay on the ground. Then he tied up all his money in her apron, and slung it on his back like a bundle, put the tinder box in his pocket, and walked off to the nearest town. It was a very nice town, and he put up at the best inn, and ordered a dinner of all his favourite dishes, for now he was rich and had plenty of money. The servant, who cleaned his boots, thought they certainly were a shabby pair to be worn by such a rich gentleman, for he had not yet bought any new ones. The next day, however, he procured some good clothes and proper boots, so that our soldier soon became known as a fine gentleman, and the people visited him, and told him all the wonders that were to be seen in the town, and of the king's beautiful daughter, the princess. "Where can I see her?" asked the soldier. "She is not to be seen at all," they said. "She lives in a large copper castle surrounded by walls and towers. No one but the king himself can pass in or out, for there has been a prophecy that she will marry a common soldier, and the king cannot bear to think of such a marriage." "I should like very much to see her," thought the soldier, but he could not obtain permission to do so. However, he passed a very pleasant time, went to the theatre, drove in the king's garden, and gave a great deal of money to the poor, which was very good of him. He remembered what it had been in olden times to be without a shilling. Now he was rich, had fine clothes, and many friends, who all declared he was a fine fellow and a real gentleman, and all this gratified him exceedingly. But his money would not last forever, and as he spent and gave away a great deal daily, and received none, he found himself at last with only 2 shillings left. So he was obliged to leave his elegant rooms, and live in a little garret under the roof, where he had to clean his own boots, and even mend them with a large needle. None of his friends came to see him. There were too many stairs to mount up. One dark evening, he had not even a penny to buy a candle. Then all at once he remembered that there was a piece of candle stuck in the tinder box, which he had brought from the old tree, into which the witch had helped him. He found the tinder box, but no sooner had he struck a few sparks from the flint and steel than the door flew open, and the dog with eyes as big as teacups, whom he had seen while down in the tree, stood before him and said, "What orders, master?" "Hello," said the soldier. "Well, this is a pleasant tinder box, if it brings me all I wish for." "Bring me some money," said he to the dog. He was gone in a moment, and presently returned, carrying a large bag of coppers in his mouth. The soldier very soon discovered after this the value of the tinder box. If he struck the flint once, the dog who sat on the chest of copper money made his appearance. If twice, the dog came from the chest of silver. And if 3 times, the dog with eyes like towers, who watched over the gold. The soldier had now plenty of money. He returned to his elegant rooms and reappeared in his fine clothes, so that his friends knew him again directly, and made as much of him as before. After a while he began to think it was very strange that no one could get a look at the princess. "Everyone says she is very beautiful," thought he to himself. "But what is the use of that, if she is to be shut up in a copper castle surrounded by so many towers? Can I, by any means, get to see her? Stop! Where is my tinder box?" Then he struck a light, and in a moment the dog with eyes as big as teacups stood before him. "It is midnight," said the soldier. "Yet I should very much like to see the princess, if only for a moment." The dog disappeared instantly, and before the soldier could even look round, he returned with the princess. She was lying on the dog's back, asleep, and looked so lovely that everyone who saw her would know she was a real princess. The soldier could not help kissing her, true soldier as he was. Then the dog ran back with the princess, but in the morning, while at breakfast with the king and queen, she told them what a singular dream she had had during the night, of a dog and a soldier that she had ridden on the dog's back and been kissed by the soldier. "That is a very pretty story indeed," said the queen. So, the next night, one of the old ladies of the court was set to watch by the princess's bed to discover whether it really was a dream, or what else it might be. The soldier longed very much to see the princess once more, so he sent for the dog again in the night to fetch her, and to run with her as fast as ever he could. But the old lady put on water boots and ran after him as quickly as he did, and found that he carried the princess into a large house. She thought it would help her to remember the place if she made a large cross on the door with a piece of chalk. Then she went home to bed, and the dog presently returned with the princess. But when he saw that a cross had been made on the door of the house where the soldier lived, he took another piece of chalk and made crosses on all the doors in the town, so that the lady in waiting might not be able to find out the right door. Early the next morning, the king and queen accompanied the lady and all the officers of the household to see where the princess had been. "Here it is," said the king, when they came to the first door with a cross on it. "No, my dear husband, it must be that one," said the queen, pointing to a second door having a cross also. "And here is one, and there is another," they all exclaimed, for there were crosses on all the doors in every direction. So they felt it would be useless to search any farther. But the queen was a very clever woman. She could do a great deal more than merely ride in a carriage. She took her large gold scissors, cut a piece of silk into squares, and made a neat little bag. This bag she filled with buckwheat flour, and tied it round the princess's neck, and then she cut a small hole in the bag, so that the flour might be scattered on the ground as the princess went along. During the night, the dog came again, and carried the princess on his back, and ran with her to the soldier, who loved her very much, and wished that he had been a prince, so that he might have her for a wife. The dog did not observe how the flour ran out of the bag all the way from the castle wall to the soldier's house, and even up to the window, where he had climbed with the princess. Therefore, in the morning, the king and queen found out where their daughter had been, and the soldier was taken up and put in prison. Oh, how dark and disagreeable it was as he sat there, and the people said to him, "Tomorrow you will be hanged." It was not very pleasant news, and besides, he had left the tinder box at the inn. In the morning he could see through the iron grating of the little window how the people were hastening out of the town to see him hanged. He heard the drums beating, and saw the soldiers marching. Everyone ran out to look at them, and a shoemaker's boy, with a leather apron and slippers on, galloped by so fast that one of his slippers flew off and struck against the wall where the soldier sat looking through the iron grating. "Hullo, you shoemaker's boy! You need not be in such a hurry," cried the soldier to him. "There will be nothing to see till I come, but if you will run to the house where I have been living, and bring me my tinder box, you shall have 4 shillings, but you must put your best foot foremost." The shoemaker's boy liked the idea of getting the 4 shillings, so he ran very fast and fetched the tinder box and gave it to the soldier. And now we shall see what happened. Outside the town, a large gibbet had been erected, round which stood the soldiers and several thousands of people. The king and the queen sat on splendid thrones opposite to the judges, and the whole council. The soldier already stood on the ladder, but as they were about to place the rope around his neck, he said that an innocent request was often granted to a poor criminal before he suffered death. He wished very much to smoke a pipe, as it would be the last pipe he should ever smoke in the world. The king could not refuse this request, so the soldier took his tinder-box and struck fire, once, twice, thrice, and there in a moment stood all the dogs, the one with eyes as big as teacups, the one with eyes as large as mill wheels, and the third whose eyes were like towers. "Help me now, that I may not be hanged," cried the soldier, and the dogs fell upon the judges and all the councillors, seized one by the legs and another by the nose, and tossed them many feet high in the air, so that they fell down and were dashed to pieces. "I will not be touched," said the king. But the largest dog seized him, as well as the queen, and threw them after the others. Then the soldiers and all the people were afraid, and cried, "Good soldier, you shall be our king, and you shall marry the beautiful princess." So they placed the soldier in the king's carriage, and the 3 dogs ran on in front and cried, "Hurrah!" And the little boys whistled through their fingers, and the soldiers presented arms. The princess came out of the copper castle and became queen, which was very pleasing to her. The wedding festivities lasted a whole week, and the dogs sat at the table and stared with all their eyes. The toad. The well was deep, and therefore the rope had to be a long one. It was heavy work, turning the handle when anyone had to raise a bucket full of water over the edge of the well. Though the water was clear, the sun never looked down far enough into the well to mirror itself in the waters, but as far as its beams could reach, green things grew forth between the stones in the sides of the well. Down below dwelt a family of the toad race. They had, in fact, come head over heels down the well, in the person of the old mother, Toad, who was still alive. The green frogs, who had been established there a long time and swam about in the water, called them well guests. But the newcomers seemed determined to stay where they were, for they found it very agreeable living in a dry place, as they called the wet stones. The mother frog had once been a traveller. She happened to be in the water bucket when it was drawn up, but the light became too strong for her, and she got a pain in her eyes. Fortunately, she scrambled out of the bucket, but she fell into the water with a terrible flop, and had to lie sick for 3 days with pains in her back. She certainly had not much to tell of the things up above, but she knew this, and all the frogs knew it, that the well was not all the world. The mother toad might have told this and that if she had chosen, but she never answered when they asked her anything, and so they left off asking. "She's thick and fat and ugly," said the young green frogs, "and her children will be just as ugly as she is." "That may be," retorted the mother toad, "but one of them has a jewel in his head, or else I have the jewel." The young frogs listened and stared, and as these words did not please them, they made grimaces and dived down under the water. But the little toads kicked up their hind legs from mere pride, for each of them thought that he must have the jewel, and then they sat and held their heads quite still. But at length they asked what it was that made them so proud, and what kind of a thing a jewel might be. "Oh, it is such a splendid and precious thing that I cannot describe it," said the mother toad. "It's something which one carries about for one's own pleasure, and that makes other people angry. But don't ask me any questions, for I shan't answer you." "Well, I haven't got the jewel," said the smallest of the toads. She was as ugly as a toad can be. "Why should I have such a precious thing? And if it makes others angry, it can't give me any pleasure. No, I only wish I could get to the edge of the well and look out. It must be beautiful up there." "You'd better stay where you are," said the old mother toad, "for you know everything here, and you can tell what you have. Take care of the bucket, for it will crush you to death, and even if you get into it safely, you may fall out. And it's not everyone who falls so cleverly as I did, and gets away with whole legs and whole bones." "Quack!" said the little toad, and that's just as if one of us were to say, "Aha!" She had an immense desire to get to the edge of the well, and to look over. She felt such a longing for the green up there. And the next morning, when it chanced that the bucket was being drawn up, filled with water, and stopped for a moment just in front of the stone on which the toad sat, the little creature's heart moved within it, and our toad jumped into the filled bucket, which presently was drawn to the top and emptied out. "Oh, you beast!" said the farm labourer who emptied the bucket when he saw the toad. "You're the ugliest thing I've seen for one while." And he made a kick with his wooden shoe at the toad, which just escaped being crushed by managing to scramble into the nettles which grew high by the well's brink. Here she saw stem by stem, but she looked up also. The sun shone through the leaves, which were quite transparent, and she felt as a person would feel who steps suddenly into a great forest, where the sun looks in between the branches and leaves. "It's much nicer here than down in the well. I should like to stay here my whole life long," said the little toad. So she lay there for an hour, yes, for 2 hours. "I wonder what is to be found up here. As I have come so far, I must try to go still farther." And so she crawled on as fast as she could crawl, and got out upon the highway where the sun shone upon her, and the dust powdered her all over as she marched across the way. "I've got to a dry place now, and no mistake," said the toad. "It's almost too much of a good thing here. It tickles one so." She came to the ditch, and forget-me-nots were growing there, and meadow-sweet, and a very little way off was a hedge of whitethorn, and elder bushes grew there too, and bindweed with white flowers. Gay colours were to be seen here, and a butterfly, too, was flitting by. The toad thought it was a flower which had broken loose, that it might look about better in the world, which was quite a natural thing to do. "If one could only make such a journey as that," said the toad. "Croak! How capital that would be!" 8 days and 8 nights she stayed by the well, and experienced no want of provisions. On the 9th day she thought, "Forward, onward!" But what could she find more charming and beautiful? Perhaps a little toad or a few green frogs. During the last night there had been a sound borne on the breeze, as if there were cousins in the neighbourhood. "It's a glorious thing to live, glorious to get out of the well, and to lie among the stinging nettles, and to crawl along the dusty road. But onward, onward, that we may find frogs or a little toad. We can't do without that. Nature alone is not enough for one." And so she went forward on her journey. She came out into the open field to a great pond, round about which grew reeds, and she walked into it. "It will be too damp for you here," said the frogs, "but you are very welcome. Are you a he or a she? But it doesn't matter, you are equally welcome." And she was invited to the concert in the evening. The family concert, great enthusiasm and thin voices. We know the sort of thing. No refreshments were given, only there was plenty to drink, for the whole pond was free. "Now I shall resume my journey," said the little toad, for she always felt a longing for something better. She saw the stars shining so large and so bright, and she saw the moon gleaming, and then she saw the sun rise, and mount higher and higher. Perhaps, after all, I am still in a well, only in a larger well. I must get higher yet. I feel a great restlessness and longing. And when the moon became round and full, the poor creature thought, "I wonder if that is the bucket which will be let down, and into which I must step to get higher up. Or is the sun the great bucket? How great it is, how bright it is. It can take up all. I must look out, that I may not miss the opportunity. Oh, how it seems to shine in my head! I don't think the jewel can shine brighter. But I haven't the jewel. Not that I cry about that. No, I must go higher up into splendor and joy. I feel so confident, and yet I am afraid. It's a difficult step to take, and yet it must be taken. Onward, therefore, straight onward. She took a few steps, such as a crawling animal may take, and soon found herself on a road beside which people dwelt. But there were flower gardens as well as kitchen gardens, and she sat down to rest by a kitchen garden. What a number of different creatures there are that I never knew, and how beautiful and great the world is! But one must look round in it, and not stay in one spot. And then she hopped into the kitchen garden. How green it is here! How beautiful it is here! I know that, said the caterpillar, on the leaf. My leaf is the largest here. It hides half the world from me, but I don't care for the world. Cluck, cluck. And some fowls came. They tripped about in the cabbage garden. The fowl who marched at the head of them had a long sight, and she spied the caterpillar on the green leaf, and pecked at it, so that the caterpillar fell on the ground, where it twisted and writhed. The fowl looked at it first with one eye, and then with the other, for she did not know what the end of this writhing would be. It doesn't do that with a good will, thought the fowl, and lifted up her head to peck at the caterpillar. The toad was so horrified at this that she came crawling straight up towards the fowl. Aha! It has allies, quoth the fowl. Just look at the crawling thing. And then the fowl turned away. I don't care for the little green morsel. It would only tickle my throat. The other fowls took the same view of it, and they all turned away together. I writhed myself free, said the caterpillar. What a good thing it is when one has presence of mind. But the hardest thing remains to be done, and that is to get on my leaf again. Where is it? And the little toad came up and expressed her sympathy. She was glad that in her ugliness she had frightened the fowls. What do you mean by that? Cried the caterpillar. I wriggled myself free from the fowl. You are very disagreeable to look at. Cannot I be left in peace on my own property? Now I smell cabbage. Now I am near my leaf. Nothing is so beautiful as property. But I must go higher up. Yes, higher up, said the little toad. Higher up. She feels just as I do, but she's not in a good humor today. That's because of the fright. We all want to go higher up. And she looked up as high as ever she could. The stork sat in his nest on the roof of the farmhouse. He clapped with his beak, and the mother stork clapped with hers. How high up they live, thought the toad. If one could only get as high as that. In the farmhouse lived two young students. The one was a poet, and the other a scientific searcher into the secrets of nature. The one sang and wrote joyously of everything that God had created and how it was mirrored in his heart. He sang it out clearly, sweetly, richly, in well-sounding verses, while the other investigated created matter itself and even cut it open where need was. He looked upon God's creation as a great sum in arithmetic, subtracted, multiplied, and tried to know it within and without, and to talk with understanding concerning it. And that was a very sensible thing. And he spoke joyously and cleverly of it. They were good, joyful men, those two. There sits a good specimen of a toad, said the naturalist. I must have that fellow in a bottle of spirits. You have two of them already, replied the poet. Let the thing sit there and enjoy its life. But it's so wonderfully ugly, persisted the first. Yes, if we could find the jewel in its head, said the poet. "I too should be for cutting it open." "A jewel!" cried the naturalist. "You seem to know a great deal about natural history. But is there not something beautiful in the popular belief that just as the toad is the ugliest of animals, it should often carry the most precious jewel in its head? Is it not just the same thing with men? What a jewel that was that Aesop had, and still more, Socrates. The toad did not hear any more, nor did she understand half of what she had heard." The two friends walked on, and thus she escaped the fate of being bottled up in spirits. "Those two also were speaking of the jewel," said the toad to herself. "What a good thing that I have not got it. I might have been in a very disagreeable position." Now there was a clapping on the roof of the farmhouse. "Father!" Stork was making a speech to his family, and his family was glancing down at the two young men in the kitchen garden. "Man is the most conceited creature," said the stork. "Listen how their jaws are wagging, and for all that they can't clap properly. They boast of their gifts of eloquence and their language. Yes, a fine language truly. Why, it changes in every day's journey we make. One of them doesn't understand another. Now, we can speak our language over the whole earth, up in the north and in Egypt, and then men are not able to fly, moreover. They rush along by means of an invention they call railway, but they often break their necks over it. It makes my beak turn cold when I think of it. The world could get on without men. We could do without them very well, so long as we only keep frogs and earthworms." "That was a powerful speech," thought the little toad. "What a great man that is yonder, and how high he sits! Higher than ever I saw anyone sit yet, and how he can swim!" she cried, as the stork soared away through the air with outspread pinions. And the mother stork began talking in the nest, and told about Egypt and the waters of the Nile, and the incomparable mud that was to be found in that strange land. And all this sounded new and very charming to the little toad. "I must go to Egypt," said she. "If the stork or one of his young ones would only take me, I would oblige him in return. Yes, I shall get to Egypt, for I feel so happy. All the longing and all the pleasure that I feel is much better than having a jewel in one's head." And it was just she who had the jewel. That jewel was the continual striving and desire to go upward, ever upward. It gleamed in her head, gleamed in joy, beamed brightly in her longing. Then suddenly up came the stork. He had seen the toad in the grass, and stooped down and seized the little creature anything but gently. The stork's beak pinched her, and the wind whistled. It was not exactly agreeable, but she was going upward towards Egypt, and she knew it, and that was why her eyes gleamed, and a spark seemed to fly out of them. Quunk! Ah! The body was dead. The toad was killed. But the spark that had shot forth from her eyes, what became of that? The sunbeam took it up. The sunbeam carried the jewel from the head of the toad. Whither? Ask not the naturalist, rather ask the poet. He will tell it thee under the guise of a fairy tale. And the caterpillar on the cabbage and the stork family belong to the story. Think, the caterpillar is changed and turns into a beautiful butterfly. The stork family flies over mountains and seas to the distant Africa, and yet finds the shortest way home to the same country, to the same roof. Nay, that is almost too improbable. And yet it is true. You may ask the naturalist, he will confess it is so, and you know it yourself, for you have seen it. But the jewel in the head of the toad? Seek it in the sun, see it there if you can. The brightness is too dazzling there. We have not yet such eyes as can see into the glories which God has created, but we shall receive them by and by. and that will be the most beautiful story of all, and we shall all have our share in it, the top and ball." A whipping top and a little ball lay together in a box among other toys, and the top said to the ball, "Shall we be married, as we live in the same box?" But the ball, which wore a dress of Morocco leather, and thought as much of herself as any other young lady, would not even condescend to reply. The next day came, the little boy to whom the playthings belonged, and he painted the top red and yellow, and drove a brass-headed nail into the middle, so that while the top was spinning round, it looked splendid. "Look at me," said the top to the ball. "What do you say now? Shall we be engaged to each other? We should suit so well, you spring and I dance. No one could be happier than we should be." "Indeed, do you think so? Perhaps you do not know that my father and mother were Morocco slippers, and that I have a Spanish cork in my body." "Yes, but I am made of mahogany," said the top. "The Major himself turned me. He has a turning lathe of his own, and it is a great amusement to him." "Can I believe it?" asked the ball. "May I never be whipped again," said the top, "if I am not telling you the truth." "You certainly know how to speak for yourself very well," said the ball. "But I cannot accept your proposal. I am almost engaged to a swallow. Every time I fly up in the air, he puts his head out of the nest and says, 'Will you?' And I have said yes to myself silently, and that is as good as being half engaged, but I will promise never to forget you." "Much good that will be to me," said the top, and they spoke to each other no more. Next day the ball was taken out by the boy. The top saw it flying high in the air like a bird, till it would go quite out of sight. Each time it came back, as it touched the earth, it gave a higher leap than before, either because it longed to fly upwards or from having a Spanish cork in its body. But the 9th time it rose in the air, it remained away and did not return. The boy searched everywhere for it, but he searched in vain, for it could not be found. It was gone. "I know very well where she is," sighed the top. "She is in the swallow's nest, and has married the swallow." The more the top thought of this, the more he longed for the ball. His love increased, the more just because he could not get her, and that she should have been won by another was the worst of all. The top still twirled about and hummed, but he continued to think of the ball, and the more he thought of her, the more beautiful she seemed to his fancy. Thus several years passed by, and his love became quite old. The top, also, was no longer young, but there came a day when he looked handsomer than ever, for he was gilded all over. He was now a golden top, and whirled and danced about till he hummed quite loud and was something worth looking at. But one day he leaped too high, and then he, also, was gone. They searched everywhere, even in the cellar, but he was nowhere to be found. Where could he be? He had jumped into the dustbin, where all sorts of rubbish were lying, cabbage stalks, dust, and rain droppings that had fallen down from the gutter under the roof. "Now I am in a nice place," said he. "My gilding will soon be washed off here. Oh dear, what a set of rabble I have got amongst." And then he glanced at a curious round thing like an old apple, which lay near a long, leafless cabbage stalk. It was, however, not an apple, but an old ball, which had lain for years in the gutter and was soaked through with water. "Thank goodness, here comes one of my own class, with whom I can talk," said the ball, examining the gilded top. "I am made of Morocco," she said. "I was sewn together by a young lady, and I have a Spanish cork in my body, but no one would think it to look at me now. I was once engaged to a swallow, but I fell in here from the gutter under the roof, and I have lain here more than 5 years and have been thoroughly drenched. Believe me, It is a long time for a young maiden." The top said nothing, but he thought of his old love, and the more she said, the more clear it became to him that this was the same ball. The servant then came to clean out the dustbin. "Ah!" she exclaimed, "here is a gilt top." So the top was brought again to notice and honour, but nothing more was heard of the little ball. He spoke not a word about his old love, for that soon died away. When the beloved object has lain for 5 years in a gutter and has been drenched through, no one cares to know her again on meeting her in a dustbin.